The story begins with our heroine realizing she had reincarnated into this world at the age of 8, which happened during a tea party at the Imperial Palace, when she opened her eyes to a clear blue sky and a fairy tale garden. She saw people in colorful clothes and a girl with sky blue hair wandering in the garden. A voice called her Espen Samuel, warning her not to wander off. At that moment, the girl with red eyes was shocked to hear the name. She knew she was Kim So-yeon and wondered in confusion why they were calling her Espen and if she was in a dream. To make sure, she pinched her cheek hard and felt pain, confirming it wasn't just a dream. She clearly remembered sleeping in her bed last night, which increased her confusion about what was happening. She tried to calm herself and think logically while sitting on the swing, wondering if this was a lucid dream or if she had entered a virtual reality game without realizing it, especially since she remembered nothing. Her train of thought was interrupted by the sound of nearby whispers, asking if they were doing it again. She decided to hide and eavesdrop, hoping to understand what was going on around her. The conversation was between the palace ladies about finding a playmate for Prince Luciano, and the name seemed familiar to Espen. One of them spoke sarcastically about everyone knowing the true purpose of this tea party, criticizing Empress Isabel's actions. Her companion quickly warned her to lower her voice and remember that they were inside the Imperial Palace, so the lady apologized in fear. They wondered who might volunteer to be the prince's companion, mentioning that the Marquis Simon's family was desperate for any royal connection, insisting that their eldest daughter, Brianna, could become a mage, even though Prince Stephen would never choose her. Upon hearing the names Luciano, Brianna, and Stephen, Espen began connecting the events to a novel she had read before. She remembered the novel's title, Your Majesty, Please Don't Be Obsessed, and the details of the Simon family, which used to produce great mages but whose magical lineage had ceased. The original heroine, Brianna, had approached the male lead with the goal of reviving her declining family. That male lead was none other than the first prince and primary heir to the throne, Luciano Frederick. Luciano lived a life full of constant threats from Empress Isabel and the second Prince Stephen, especially after losing his mother at an early age. While Brianna needed power to restore her family's glory, Luciano desperately needed forces to support him. Thus, the two united out of necessity, and after a series of events, they fell in love, letting the story follow that typical path expected of novels. Suddenly, the girl realized that the castle in front of her perfectly matched the novel's description, confirming to her that this was not a dream, but that she was indeed inside the world of the novel. She quickly deduced that it was a case of reincarnation into another body. She remembered they called her Espen a moment ago, but she had never seen this name in the original novel, meaning Espen was just an extra character of no importance. However, judging by her long experience reading romantic fantasy novels, reincarnating into the body of a nobody meant only one thing. She had become the new heroine of the novel. She nodded confidently, convinced that this was the classic reincarnation cliché. She wondered briefly what happened to the original body, but decided to enjoy her new opportunity, relying on the heroine perks she would get to live a life paved with gold. She started thinking about the main characters linked to the heroine. First, the original male lead, Luciano Frederick, then the second male lead, Harrison Olindo, and the hidden villain, Damien Quaid, wondering if her own story's hero would be one of them. Her thoughts were interrupted by the entrance of the Empress and the princes, surprising her with the rapid pace of events. Watching the scene from her hiding place, she deduced from their appearance that this was their childhood phase, before the main story events began. She immediately recognized Luciano thanks to his pale skin, bright blonde hair, and red eyes. Seeing his features up close, she realized he was much more beautiful than described, and that he was the male lead of the original story. She felt pity for him. Although he would become obsessed in the future, in his childhood, he truly looked pathetic. Espen realized that this tea party was nothing but a scheme orchestrated by Empress Isabel to humiliate Luciano and pave the way for her son to the throne. The Empress arrived with Prince Stephen, asking with feigned innocence if they were late. With a sly smile, she thanked the attendees and invited them to sit wherever they pleased. She always claimed that these spring tea parties aimed to foster friendship, but everyone knew the truth of her intentions. Empress Isabel looked at the table where her son, Prince Stephen, sat surrounded by people, then made sure Luciano was sitting completely alone at the opposite table, exactly as it happened in the original novel. Espen watched the situation with resentment, realizing the Empress was isolating him blatantly, and described her behavior as very childish. The Empress approached Luciano, asking him with veiled sarcasm if he was alone again this year, to which Luciano calmly replied in the affirmative. The Empress feigned sympathy, saying his social skills were very poor and that she had to intervene. Espen remembered this scene clearly, even though it was just a side story in the novel. The Empress raised her voice addressing the attendees, asking if there was anyone who wished to befriend Prince Luciano, claiming she worried about him getting hurt at these parties. Silence and hesitation prevailed among the audience, thus beginning the search for a playmate for Prince Luciano. Silence filled the place as everyone froze in their seats, watching Empress Isabel's reaction with great anticipation. That moment was enough to remind Luciano once again of a painful truth, that he was completely alone in this world. Meanwhile, Espen was watching the scene, wondering angrily how they could sit there motionless. Despite her foreknowledge that this would happen, she couldn't stand the situation anymore. Suddenly, a small voice rose, declaring the desire to step forward, breaking the silence. Espen jumped from her seat, raising her hand enthusiastically, announcing she would be the prince's friend, justifying her impulsive behavior by the fact that the bright heroine is often spontaneous and unaware of the tense atmosphere. She stood before them boldly and with a broad smile, addressing Prince Luciano that she would be his friend, which astonished the prince, who muttered in amazement, while the Empress shot her a cold look. The Empress recovered the situation with a fake smile, thanking her for the offer, and asked in a soft tone for the brave girl's name. Espen lifted the hem of her dress and bowed respectfully, introducing herself as Espen from the Count Samuel family, expressing her honor to meet them. The attendees began whispering in admiration, praising the Count's upbringing of his daughter and her good behavior. Although everyone chose silence, Espen's bold advance pushed the Empress to comment that she was a kind-hearted and warm girl, while hiding her real annoyance behind her fan. Espen felt confused for a moment, wondering if she should have remained silent and read the room, thinking about how to apologize for her haste. But she quickly regained her confidence when the Empress thanked her and decided to continue her role as the bright heroine, smiling innocently. The two exchanged looks, carrying a hidden challenge under the mask of kindness and smiles. The Empress asked Espen calmly about the reason driving her desire to be his friend, adding maliciously, directing a loaded question to Espen, asking if her motive was pity. Espen was shocked by the way the question was asked, making it seem strange and offensive, and looked anxiously at Luciano, hoping he wouldn't believe these words seriously. Espen noticed the looks of doubt beginning to appear in Luciano's eyes, realizing the Empress was trying to manipulate and isolate him, so she addressed him internally, not to fall into the trap of the woman torturing him. She clenched her fist in tension, deciding she had no choice but to resort to the shy child trick to get out of this predicament. She pretended not to understand, asking innocently what pity meant, and if one even needed a reason to become friends with someone. The Empress seemed annoyed and cornered by Espen's persistence, who continued playing her role skillfully. Espen expressed her extreme surprise at the Queen's question, pretending to be confused as if she didn't understand the malicious intent, while inside she was celebrating the success of her plan. Espen reminded the Empress that she was worried just moments ago about the prince remaining alone forever. Espen continued her soft attack, pointing out that the Empress's use of the word insist made it seem as if she was uncomfortable with the idea of the prince having a friend. She added with childish seriousness that she learned the necessity of harmony and treating everyone with kindness. She looked around at the attendees asking, "Isn't that how it should be?" making everyone agree with her in murmurs. The Empress tried to retreat and justify her position nervously, saying Espen misunderstood, but Espen didn't give her the chance to make up excuses and decided to move to the next step. Her eyes welled up with fake tears, asking with a trembling voice if the Empress didn't like her, prompting the Empress to deny quickly. The attendees started whispering about the Empress's cruelty towards an innocent little girl, and how she opposed the prince getting friends just because the girl was a count's daughter. The Empress was forced to save face, denying any objection and confirming with a tense laugh that Espen lacked nothing, claiming she was only worried the introverted prince might feel overwhelmed. Espen seized the opportunity immediately, wiping her tears, and announced with a broad, triumphant smile that, as long as Her Majesty didn't mind, she would like to become His Highness's friend starting that day. Empress Isabel finally agreed, asking Espen to take care of the prince, but her gaze held hidden surprise that the little girl didn't cry as expected, while Espen was already planning to run things her own way. Suddenly, she called out to Prince Luciano while he sat alone at his table. Espen approached him confidently and introduced herself, saying she was Espen Samuel. With a bright smile full of vitality, she suggested they become friends starting today, while telling herself proudly about her wonderful performance that perfectly resembled a heroine's behavior. Later that evening at the Samuel family residence, Espen faced reproachful questions about her reckless behavior at the party. Her parents, Count Benjamin and his wife Lily, stood before her with shock on their faces, expressing their amazement at her boldness in addressing the Empress in such a sudden manner. Espen looked at them, realizing deep down that these two were her parents from now on. She recalled the moment she realized her transition to this world, as the original Espen's memories up to age 8 flooded her mind, and she felt overwhelmed with happiness due to the warmth and tenderness these parents surrounded their daughter with. Her father asked her seriously and anxiously if she really wanted to befriend Prince Luciano, causing Espen to feel disturbed seeing her father's worried expression, wondering if the original Espen's feelings were still affecting her. She remembered the Empress's frightening aura and felt regret that her haste and focus on Luciano might expose her family to harm. She justified her position to her parents in a faint voice, explaining she couldn't stand and watch while the prince was in such a sad situation. Then she bowed her head, apologizing for her individual action, rubbing her hands nervously. Silence prevailed for moments, and Espen thought she would receive a harsh scolding, but she was surprised by her father patting her head tenderly, explaining that their question wasn't blame, but because they were worried she might face difficulties. He smiled at her, confirming that thinking of others and putting them before herself was admirable, and encouraged her to follow her heart. The parents confirmed their full support for her, asking her to enjoy her time with the prince and turn to them whenever she needed help, making Espen realize they preferred her choice and happiness despite their clear worry about Empress Isabel. With their assurance that they were always on her side, tears began to gather in Espen's eyes. She wondered in amazement what this unconditional love was, and if she really deserved to receive all this warmth even though she wasn't the real Espen, wishing to stay by their side forever. She felt she might cry from being so moved because she had never received such love in her previous life. Her parents hugged her tightly to reassure her that she wasn't alone, and there was no need to worry by herself. Her feeling of guilt and gratitude increased towards their great kindness despite their ignorance of the truth. She hugged her father, wondering secretly if she would ever have the courage to tell them the painful truth that she wasn't their real daughter. After a few days, Espen headed to Prince Luciano's palace, fulfilling the promise of friendship she made at the tea party. She stood before the door ready to start her role as the story's heroine and knocked enthusiastically. She entered the room with a broad smile, greeting the prince and introducing herself again. With cheerful confidence, she wondered to herself if he had been waiting impatiently for her arrival. But Luciano's reaction was cold and surprising, mentioning he told the guards to bar visitors, to which Espen told him in surprise that she had sent a request letter beforehand. He answered with complete coldness, standing rigidly, that he didn't recall replying to that letter, and that he was currently busy. Espen was shocked when he asked her to leave and return from where she came, as she didn't expect things to go this way. She realized he ignored her letter on purpose, while she naively assumed that no reply meant approval. So she decided firmly she wouldn't leave after coming all this distance just to be kicked out so simply. Espen tried to remind Prince Luciano of the friendship offer she made him earlier, assuring him her words didn't stem from pity or a passing whim, but were completely sincere, and begged him to give her a little of his time. She justified her persistence, saying they wouldn't get to know each other if they didn't meet, and used her secret weapon, puppy dog eyes, believing in the saying that kindness is the best way to melt cold hearts. But Luciano mocked her attempt, calling it ridiculous and defining her concept of friendship as intruding on others' privacy and visiting them without prior permission. He turned his back on her coldly, declaring he didn't need a friend who lacked basic manners, and ordered her to be gone by the time he returned. He slammed the door behind him, leaving her alone in the room. Espen flared up in anger, clenching her fist, trembling with rage, calling him an idiot. She imagined herself delivering strong punches to the Empress, denouncing his arrogant behavior and how he thought he could say whatever he pleased, especially after she defended him before the Empress at the tea party, so he shouldn't have been this cruel. She calmed down a little and admitted to herself she was wrong to assume silence meant consent, but she also blamed him for not refusing clearly. Had he done so, she wouldn't have bothered coming. She sighed deeply, trying to pull herself together, realizing that playing the heroine role wasn't easy, and beginnings are always stumbling. She remembered details of the original novel, and how Luciano always suffered from a lack of trust in others due to constant assassination attempts, and that he fought many conflicts with the original heroine Brianna before they got closer. She deduced that his current hostile attitude was nothing but a natural defense mechanism to protect himself. She decided not to be impatient and to keep trying, believing that if she showed him her sincerity consistently, Luciano would open his heart to her one day. Espen began writing letters seriously and regularly, graduating from simple greetings and asking about his well-being, to polite requests to meet him when his time allowed. But Luciano didn't grant her permission to visit easily, and the matter between them turned into something like a battle between a spear and a shield. where her letters were met with constant rejection. After sending more than 10 letters and exerting all this effort, she felt extremely frustrated. She lay on her bed, rolling around and screaming with childish grumbling, wondering why he rejected her again, realizing things don't go smoothly even for the story's heroine. Her nanny Diana intervened to console her, so Espen asked if she was a bad person no one wanted to befriend, but the nanny denied that, assuring her she was a very lovable girl. The nanny noticed Espen preparing to send another letter despite everything. Espen muttered that she was starting to get tired of the constant rejection, so the nanny suggested stopping the correspondence, suggesting the prince wasn't ready to get close to anyone yet. Espen acknowledged her letters might be annoying to Luciano, but she couldn't stop. She remembered his image sitting alone at the dining table and wondered how she could leave him alone after seeing that scene with her own eyes. She knew he would have to endure his loneliness until he grew up, but she wanted to be a source of strength for him so he wouldn't feel lonely. Additionally, she had another motive, the necessity of staying by the prince's side to be able to meet the second male lead, Harrison, who would appear later as Luciano's guardian knight. She made up her mind and decided to send one last letter. She sealed the letter with red wax, deciding that if she was rejected this time too, she would look for another way to reach him. A few days later, just as she was about to lose hope of getting a reply, a letter arrived. She opened it eagerly to read a brief approval from the prince that he would allow her visit tomorrow. She felt overwhelmed with happiness for finally getting permission to visit, and the palace looked bright in her eyes. At the appointed time, she entered Prince Luciano's room with a broad, bright smile, greeting him enthusiastically. Espen went back to introducing herself once again, asking the prince to call her by her name, Espen. The prince asked her sarcastically if people told her she was a bit slow-witted. Espen thought his allowing the visit meant a change in his feelings, but she discovered his difficult personality hadn't changed at all. She tried to lighten the mood with a cheerful laugh, claiming she was often described as smart. But Luciano replied sarcastically, asking if the definition of smart had changed, pointing out her inability to understand his repeated rejections. Espen felt frustrated, telling herself that novel heroes usually weaken before bright heroines, but he still seemed completely displeased. She surprised Luciano by saying she actually understood what he meant, which astonished him. Espen decided then to be completely honest, confessing she pretended not to understand his rejection because she wanted to see him so badly, wondering internally if he would continue rejecting her after this frank confession. Luciano stared at her rigidly, asking for the reason, so she assured him again she just wanted to be his friend. His features shifted to suspicion, saying if she was doing this because of what happened at the tea party, there was no need to act the role of a friend. Espen immediately realized the misunderstanding. He thought she was forced to befriend him due to her stance before the Empress. Or perhaps he believed she was one of Empress Isabel's minions playing a role designed for her. Espen sighed in sorrow that his thinking went to this dark place. Espen approached him, saying firmly she didn't care about others' opinions, and her desire for his friendship stemmed sincerely from her heart. She looked at him with shining eyes, begging him to give her a little of his time in the future to prove she had no hidden intentions. Luciano clenched his fist in tension, muttering that things like friendship are matters accepted by other people. Then he turned his back on her, coldly saying he wasn't one of them, and ordered her to find someone else and leave immediately. Espen realized insisting now was useless, so she decided to retreat smartly and thanked him for his time. She left the room sighing, but quickly encouraged herself that their conversation today was longer than usual, considering that progress. She raised her fist enthusiastically, renewing her vow not to give up until she became Luciano's friend. Meanwhile, Luciano watched her from the window as she left, telling himself bitterly that someone like him couldn't have friends, and that having a trustworthy friend was impossible in his world. After getting that visit permission, Espen began frequenting the prince's palace regularly, greeting him energetically every morning. Although Luciano's replies were always brief and cold, not kicking her out was enough to make her feel comfortable. On days she stayed home, Espen began writing down and organizing the original novel's information. She tried arranging future events, characters, and capital trends based on her memory as a reader. But the major problem was that the original novel's events start when the characters are adults, while she is now living in the past period mentioned very briefly in a side story. She jotted down some notes that might be useful later, despite their uselessness at the moment. She lay on her bed thinking about the lack of information regarding this period, except for the fact that Luciano suffered from mistrust since childhood and felt disappointed because the heroin perks didn't succeed in melting the ice between them as quickly as she expected. Espen told herself the prince's personality was worse than she imagined, but soon her view changed when she thought about his situation, excusing him as he had no one on his side, making this reaction natural. She remembered that despite being the prince and the story's hero, current Luciano was merely a 9-year-old child, surrounded by shadows of enemies and dangers. As the current heroine, she decided she had no choice but to understand him, especially since there was plenty of time before the original timeline of events began, giving her a chance to win his friendship. Days passed and seasons followed quickly, until almost a whole year had passed since Espen started living in this world. During a tea session in the garden, Espen asked her nanny desperately if her current situation was acceptable, as she hadn't succeeded in befriending Luciano yet. The nanny tried to reassure her, pointing out she thought things were improving between them, mentioning a small proof that the prince spoke one extra word today compared to yesterday, wondering if that counted as progress. Throughout that period, Espen's visits were one-sided, exchanging only a few customary words, while Luciano remained reading his books coldly. The prince's heart remained closed to her constant attempts. Their relationship was so fragile and ambiguous, she felt everything would end immediately if Luciano decided to ban her from visiting one day. Anxiety began to seep into Espen's heart, feeling she was still at square one, wondering fearfully what would happen if the original heroine, Brianna, appeared while she was still stuck in place. She turned to her nanny, asking seriously if there was a special secret to making friends. But the nanny answered regretfully that the last time she made a friend was many years ago. Espen felt frustrated because the nanny was the only person she could ask. She remembered sadly that before the tea party incident, she had children wanting to befriend her. But everyone cut contact with her once they learned she frequented Luciano. The nanny suddenly suggested preparing a gift for the prince, sparking Espen's interest. The nanny alerted her she always went to the prince's palace empty-handed. Espen imagined Luciano's sarcastic reaction, as if he might think she considered him a tea shop if she only brought food, but she thought offering cakes was better than nothing. She realized then she had been asking him for things every visit without offering anything in return, thinking receiving a gift might be proof of their closeness. The nanny admitted she didn't know what His Highness liked, but confirmed no one hates thoughtful gifts. Espen agreed with the logic and started racking her brain trying to remember if the original novel mentioned anything about Luciano's preferences. Suddenly, her eyes lit up and she told her nanny enthusiastically she knew exactly what to prepare. The nanny asked in surprise if she was sure, so Espen confirmed with total confidence and a broad smile that His Highness would definitely love the gift. On the next visit, Espen entered the prince's room carrying a covered basket, greeting him energetically. Luciano looked at her suspiciously, asking seriously about the reason for her broad smile, which he described as creepy. Espen didn't get angry at his comment because she was used to it. Rather, she was extremely excited to reveal her secret weapon. She told him cheerfully she always came empty-handed, so she brought him a gift today. Espen enthusiastically uncovered the basket, revealing fresh cheese muffins. She asked his opinion, pointing out their delicious smell, while basing her choice on a precise detail from the original novel stating Luciano didn't like sweet things. She remembered his dislike for sweets stemmed from his firm belief that such things made him weak. There was only one thing that managed to gain Luciano's approval in the original novel, despite his hatred for sweets, which was the cheese muffin offered by the original heroine, Brianna. Relying on this information, Espen offered him the basket with a bright smile, inviting him to eat together while they were still warm and fresh. Espen extended her hand hesitantly towards him with the muffin, but he remained standing, staring at her silently. Espen thought his hesitation stemmed from worry about the taste, so she asked if he was worried it might taste bad. She reassured him quickly she tasted it herself, and it wasn't flavorless but delicious, confirming she wouldn't force him to eat if he didn't like it. But his reaction was completely contrary to her expectations. His features suddenly changed to anger, asking sharply when he asked her to bring something like this, and why she imposed things he didn't request. Espen was shocked by his hostile tone, trying to justify her position while trembling, explaining she only brought it as a way to return the favor for allowing her to visit, considering it just common courtesy. But Luciano mocked her with a cold smile, refusing to accept her explanation, declaring he knew perfectly well this was part of some scheme. Suddenly, he directed a direct and shocking accusation at her, that she had put poison in the muffin. Espen's eyes widened in horror, screaming in amazement, repeating the word poison, asking why she would do something so heinous. Luciano answered with a dark look reflecting his bitter experiences, saying if something happened to him, she would definitely gain something, noting he met many like her before. Espen felt her heart breaking, Trying to remind him she kept visiting him all last year just so he wouldn't be lonely. But her words only increased Luciano's suspicion, accusing her of waiting all that time for the right moment to reveal her true intentions, just like everyone else. He ordered her coldly to take her gift and leave, warning her against returning to his palace again, then turned his back on her. Espen stood frozen in place, tears filling her eyes, unable to comprehend what happened. She only wanted to be kind. So how did things turn into this disaster? Espen realized that this way she wasn't helping Luciano but hurting him, and she couldn't allow things to end like this. She knew leaving now would confirm his suspicions and would make Luciano sink deeper into the swamp of mistrust. She screamed suddenly with a loud voice, stopping Luciano in his tracks, telling him she would prove it to him. She grabbed a muffin and started talking fast and nervously, saying she would eat it all right now, and if she finished it and remained fine, that would be definitive proof that there was no poison. She started stuffing her mouth with the muffin forcefully, making Luciano turn to her panicked, screaming at her to stop and get out, but she refused and insisted on proving her innocence. While eating, she was telling him she understood his inability to trust her, but she truly never intended to harm him, begging him to let her prove she wasn't an enemy. She continued eating with desperate gluttony to confirm the bread was safe. Luciano looked at her in amazement, describing her behavior as ridiculous, wondering if she thought he would trust her just because she ate a muffin as a theatrical display. He asked her to stop doing pointless things, but Espen replied she couldn't stop, as this was the only thing she could do now. At that moment, Espen realized her fatal mistake. Since waking up in this world, she arrogantly assumed she was the story's heroine, and all events and characters would revolve around her. She thought everyone would move according to her desires to achieve her happy ending. She admitted to herself she was too lax. Although this was a novel world, for these people it was their true reality. She realized the truth she completely overlooked. They weren't just characters, but independent individuals with their own feelings and lives. Espen continued eating the muffins until the last piece, telling herself she was no longer just a reader but part of this reality, blaming herself for the naivety of her previous enthusiasm for being the heroine. She swallowed the last piece, hoping this act would remove Luciano's anxiety and prove her good intentions. She offered him the empty basket with a triumphant and bright smile, confirming it was poison-free and she was perfectly fine as promised. But Luciano looked at her, describing her action as foolishness. Espen asked him with a smile if he would abandon his suspicions now after what he saw, but her body began sending alarming signals. Suddenly, she felt a shiver run through her body and her vision blurred, as if her stomach was contracting violently. She put her hand over her mouth, wondering fearfully if she got indigestion from eating too fast at this bad timing. She decided to leave immediately before he noticed anything, and things got worse, bidding him farewell nervously. But Luciano noticed her paleness, asking seriously and anxiously if she was really okay. He grabbed her hand to stop her, pointing to her pale face, admitting the muffin might have actually been strange. Espen denied that in panic and stammering, but the truth was the amount of food was beyond her capacity, and her stomach could no longer endure. Suddenly, she couldn't hold herself back and vomited in front of him, causing Luciano overwhelming shock. Espen fell to the ground in pain, wiping her mouth, trying hard to explain that what happened wasn't because of poison. She looked at him with teary eyes, hoping he would believe her. She confessed while crying she might have acted selfishly before, but swore she never tried to harm His Highness. Her consciousness began fading, and the terror of the idea that her collapse now would make Luciano certain of the poison's existence took over. Her body staggered and she fell unconscious, while Luciano screamed her name, trying to catch her before she hit the ground. In her last moments before losing consciousness, she felt despair, wondering why nothing went as she planned, and if she could really survive in this cruel world. In the midst of her consciousness darkness, she was apologizing constantly, tears streaming from her eyes, confirming she didn't mean to hurt him. She kept apologizing sincerely, and the prince seemed to look at her with eyes full of confusion and pain. The prince was touching her face, wondering why a girl like her would go this far, and what she would gain from getting close to him, unable to understand her motives. Espen finally woke up in her room at the Samuel family mansion, finding her mother beside her. She called her mother eagerly, so the mother asked tenderly about her physical condition, and Espen reassured her she was perfectly fine. Her mother told her how shocked she was when news of her collapse arrived, asking her to focus only on resting for now. Espen learned that Luciano was the one who contacted her family immediately the day of her collapse and arranged her transport by carriage home, and her parents were devastated upon her arrival in that state. She felt guilty for causing everyone worry, but tried to reassure her mother with a bright smile, claiming she ate and slept well and was full of energy now. Her mother looked at her with a deep gaze, holding her hand tenderly, saying she had something to say. She reminded her that she and her father were always on her side, and she was free to do whatever she wanted as long as she maintained her health, promising her not to worry. The mother kissed her daughter's forehead tenderly and left her to rest a bit. Espen sat on the edge of her bed, swinging her legs nervously, trying hard to resist her urgent desire to run back to the prince's palace, telling herself she had to pull it together. Nanny Diana interrupted her solitude, looking at her with eyes full of confusion and worry. Espen smiled at the nanny, who commented that reassuring her mother moments ago made everyone feel she had matured suddenly. Espen replied that she actually felt mature for a long time. Espen began thinking deeply about her new life, how she ended up in this body, and where the real Espen went. But seeing her new parents surrounding her with all this love and care made her realize something important. She became certain her parents, her nanny, and everyone in the mansion cared about her sincerely. So she decided to stop worrying and obsessing over being the novel's heroine. She called her nanny with a calm voice, asking her to send one last letter. She explained to the worried nanny she just wanted to apologize to Prince Luciano for her previous rudeness in front of him, confirming there were no other intentions behind this letter. Espen deduced smartly that the lack of bad rumors about her, despite what happened that day, meant Luciano had kept the matter quiet and protected her. So she felt apology and thanks were her duty. She grabbed the pen and started writing seriously, making a vow to herself she would never bother His Highness after this letter. Nanny Diana looked at the little girl with teary eyes, touched by this sudden maturity and difficult decision. But Espen faced the matter with a bright, broad smile, convincing herself this was the right action, and her desire to be supportive of Luciano was just a selfish desire of hers, deciding from now on to focus on what she could do in her own place. She resolved to live her life fully and happily away from the complexities of the original story. However, not long after making this decision, an official invitation arrived that turned the tables. The invitation was addressed to Dear Espen Samuel, containing flowery words about the refreshing spirit of spring, announcing a tea party at the royal palace in a week. The invitation was signed by Empress Isabel Frederick, who claimed in her letter she was extremely worried to hear of Espen's illness preventing her from attending. Previously, on a beautiful sunny day, Espen found herself inside the carriage heading towards the palace to meet the Empress. Although she preferred staying home, she realized this wasn't just a normal party, but a friend-making for the prince event, and wished she could have used illness as an excuse to be absent. She remembered the invitation words where the Empress claimed she postponed the entire event until Espen recovered and joined them. The psychological pressure was clear in the letter inviting her to enjoy time together after her recovery. Espen analyzed the situation suspiciously. The Empress remained silent for a whole year. So why summon her now? She wondered if she planned revenge for last year's incident. The Empress wasn't the only problem, but Luciano too, as this would be their first meeting since that day, and she didn't know what to expect. The carriage stopped, and the driver announced their arrival, causing Espen to feel intense tension. She got out of the carriage in front of the luxurious palace, realizing there was no room for retreat now, and she had to face what would happen bravely, and perhaps try to make a new friend. A servant received her at the entrance, confirming her identity as Lady Espen Samuel. He offered to escort her to her seat. Espen noticed a strange change in the rules this time, as guardians weren't allowed to attend, and there were no adults in the place except servants. Raising her suspicion, she wondered secretly what kind of scheme was being hatched while walking behind the servant. The servant pointed to her seat politely, so Espen thanked him, but she was shocked when she saw the seat's location. It was very far from the main table in the center, in an isolated and semi-hidden place. She realized they were practicing blatant and clear discrimination against her, but she tried to console herself that this situation, at least, wouldn't harm her family's honor, and perhaps she should be grateful for this distance. Espen tried to forcefully drive negative thoughts out of her head, deciding to stop thinking about the imperial family and focus instead on her new goal, making friends. She scanned the place until her eyes met a group of children standing near her. She greeted them enthusiastically, trying to introduce herself, but their reaction was shocking as they completely ignored her, walked away coldly, and continued talking amongst themselves. Espen realized the task wouldn't be easy, as they were avoiding her believing she was close to Prince Luciano, so she decided to look for someone else to try with. Her eyes fell on the girl who was at the previous tea party, and she remembered her name was Betty. Espen called out to her gently, but Betty deliberately ignored her and turned to call the rest of the girls, loudly to gather around her. Espen sat amazed as she watched Betty whispering to the other girls, who started looking at her and laughing with obvious sarcasm. Espen saw that malicious smile on Betty's face and realized the general atmosphere wasn't just avoidance because of Luciano, but intentional contempt. Espen sat alone on her isolated seat in the back, while the group of children continued to look at her arrogantly. Espen analyzed the situation quickly, certain that this wasn't individual behavior, but that Empress Isabel had ordered Betty, who was considered the center of the group, to act this way. She understood the plan aimed to isolate and demoralize her to mold her as the Empress wanted, but Espen felt derision at these childish attempts. She wasn't a 9-year-old to cry over this, even if she felt some anger. Telling herself that compared to the chaos she caused in front of Luciano, this bullying was considered nothing, she suddenly noticed that she was speaking fluently about the prince's name now. Suddenly, she felt movement beside her, turning to find Prince Luciano standing there, which astonished her. She tried to salvage the situation and greeted him nervously, apologizing for not greeting him properly last time, while wondering inwardly why he came so early when she wasn't mentally prepared yet. Luciano replied with his usual coldness with a brief, "I see," making Espen feel that his coldness hadn't changed at all. This atmosphere was interrupted by the arrival of Empress Isabel, accompanied by the second prince, directing her words to Luciano in a blaming tone not to be so stiff, especially since his friend Espen was present. Espen welcomed the Empress, apologizing for the delay in greeting, while thinking about the malice of the Empress who deliberately seated her in the back, then pretended to be kind now, but she replied with polite phrases befitting the occasion. With a sly smile, the Empress told Espen not to worry, and that she was just happy she joined them, inviting everyone to enjoy the tea party. While everyone exchanged conversations and laughter, silence and stiffness prevailed at the table where Luciano and Espen sat. The Empress announced that this year she decided not to invite any adults so the children could enjoy their time freely, asking maliciously if that was uncomfortable. Betty stepped up to reply with clear flattery, saying they weren't little children but had all matured, expressing their gratitude for the Empress's consideration. The Empress thanked them for their kind words, while Espen watched the scene coldly, describing it as nothing. Espen noticed with sorrow how the children learned hypocrisy and flattery from adults so skillfully, and how Betty seemed desperate to win Isabel's approval. Espen felt uncomfortable in her seat, forced to monitor the silent Luciano's mood, wishing this party would end quickly so she could return home. The Empress broke the silence, asking with feigned disapproval why Prince Luciano was quiet while everyone was enjoying themselves, especially since his friend traveled all this distance to see him. The Empress claimed slyly that Espen might feel hurt by the prince's silence. Espen realized the Empress wouldn't leave her alone, and expected her to direct the conversation to her. Espen hastened to deny with a tense smile, claiming she still felt a bit unwell, and that the prince was keeping silent out of consideration for her, so she wouldn't exhaust herself. Here, the Empress picked up the thread with a malicious smile, remembering that Espen mentioned in her letter that the illness wasn't serious. With piercing eyes full of cunning, the Empress initiated a direct and embarrassing question to Espen, inquiring how she got sick. Immediately, Espen realized she had fallen into the trap the Empress was setting for her, finding no escape but to answer with stammering and confusion, admitting she had overeaten a little. The Empress didn't stop there, but continued speaking, pointing to rumors about an incident that occurred at the prince's palace recently, asking suspiciously if Espen was really sure nothing happened. Then she gave a malicious example, hinting at the possibility of her being bullied. At that moment, Espen realized the truth. This was the real reason the Empress summoned her. She wanted to see her betray Luciano in front of everyone. Espen wondered in amazement if the Empress had waited a whole year for this opportunity, anticipating the right moment after that incident with the prince. While Espen was silent, the Empress urged her to speak, promising her protection from any retaliation if she was afraid. Espen decided to play along, feeling relieved to hear those words of reassurance. Resolved to be completely honest, she admitted in front of everyone that she was indeed being bullied, which sparked murmurs and shock among the attendees. The Empress feigned shock and anger, declaring that as an adult in the royal family, she couldn't overlook bullying occurring inside the palace. She asked about the perpetrator with feigned seriousness while looking out of the corner of her eye toward Luciano, waiting for Espen to utter his name. But Espen raised her hand and pointed confidently toward another girl, saying she was the one who bullied her. Espen screamed, accusing Betty of being the one who bullied her, causing Betty to freeze in shock. Luciano looked at Espen in amazement, disbelieving what was happening. Betty tried to defend herself, denying the charge with a trembling voice. But Espen confronted her, saying she deliberately ignored her greeting earlier, then laughed with the rest of the children as if it were funny. Betty stammered, trying to justify, approaching the Empress quickly to save the situation, claiming Espen misunderstood the situation and that Betty was just enjoying the conversation. The Empress insisted with a forced smile that it was just bad timing, asking Espen to think carefully once again. Then she asked her maliciously if anyone other than Betty had bullied her, in a desperate attempt to turn the accusation back toward the prince. But Espen sat calmly, saying if Betty didn't mean to bully, then it was fine, confirming there was no one else, thereby closing the path for the Empress to accuse Luciano. The Empress didn't give up but continued pressing, noting she knew Espen was cautious. But she heard something else. She mentioned the Samuel family carriage came to the palace to transport Espen after her sudden collapse that day. Espen felt fear of exposure as the Empress began cornering her with questions to get the answer she wanted. The Empress suggested coldly that it would be wise to clarify exactly what happened before strange rumors spread to preserve the honor of the royal family. The Empress aimed her arrows at Luciano, saying if the explanation was difficult for Espen, perhaps the prince who was with her should answer. Luciano seemed nervous, trying to justify it with the existence of force majeure circumstances at the time. The Empress interrupted him with a demonic smile, wondering what kind of circumstances would drive him to hide things this way, hinting at his personal involvement in harming her. Espen saw the fear in Luciano's eyes and realized that continued silence would make the misunderstanding about him being harmful escalate. She decided she couldn't cause him any more trouble after everything that happened. She interrupted the Empress's speech and stood up bravely, announcing loudly that the fault was entirely hers that day and she was responsible for her collapse. Espen felt extremely ashamed to reveal her naive mistake before this crowd, but realized her pride was worth nothing compared to Luciano's suffering. She decided to confess the full truth, explaining that her collapse that day and feeling unwell for several days later wasn't due to any conspiracy or poison, but was the result of her greed for food. Upon hearing the word greed, the Empress raised an eyebrow in surprise. Espen continued her explanation with childish honesty, saying the muffins she bought were so delicious she couldn't stop, and ended up eating the prince's portion too, leading to severe indigestion. The Empress asked her in amazement if she meant she collapsed simply because she ate too much, and Espen confirmed that, feeling extremely embarrassed. The Empress exploded in anger, describing her words as ridiculous nonsense. The attendees began whispering about the Empress's unusual anger, surprised by her exaggerated reaction toward a child. One of the girls felt afraid, and a girl beside her tried to calm her down. The Empress realized she lost control of her temper and spoke for too long with Espen, which might arouse suspicion. The Empress tried to salvage the situation and change the subject, directing a question to another girl named Hazel about her opinion on the refreshments, to which Hazel answered nervously that they were the most delicious ever. Meanwhile, Espen was thinking about the Empress's narrow-mindedness, expecting she wouldn't be invited to royal tea parties again. She looked at Luciano, realizing she might not see him for a long time too, and expected such difficult situations to continue in the future. But she remembered Luciano as the male lead who will overcome all odds and get his happy ending eventually. She decided she would settle for retreating now and cheering him on from afar, leaving the stage for the original heroine when her time comes. She felt exhausted from being a heroine, realizing the hero is always in the center of storms and problems. After that incident and the chaos the Empress caused, Espen thought she would never return to the palace. But a surprise awaited her, as she found herself invited again, this time by a personal invitation from Prince Luciano himself. She sat before him, tongue-tied with amazement, while he poured tea for her himself, wondering if this was real tea for drinking. She didn't believe her eyes, thinking she was dreaming, so she pinched her cheek to make sure, feeling pain. Luciano asked her in surprise what she was doing, so she answered stammering that her cheek hurt a little. She watched Luciano pouring tea for her in amazement, disbelieving this was happening in reality, wondering what came over him to change like this. She thanked him nervously and promised to drink it well while tasting the tea. Suddenly, her eyes widened in astonishment when she tasted the tea. The tea was perfect, with amazing temperature and aroma, and completely free of the usual bitterness, making her wonder if this was another talent of the male lead. Luciano noticed her facial expressions and asked the reason, so she told him honestly the tea was very delicious. Luciano smiled with satisfaction, noting there was plenty of it and invited her to drink as much as she liked. So Espen thanked him happily. Silence prevailed for moments, and Espen wondered what she should do in this awkward atmosphere. Luciano sat nervously, as if he wanted to say something but hesitated. Espen decided waiting wasn't her style and initiated asking him directly. She confronted him boldly, wondering if His Highness summoned her to tell her something, confirming. At the same time, she would appreciate his honesty in that. She added clearly that if he had nothing to say, she would have to leave, realizing he was busy too. Hesitation appeared clearly on Luciano as he muttered incomplete words before gathering himself and asking her in a faint voice about the date she would come next time. Espen looked at him in surprise, answering with a brief question. So he repeated his question with clear stammering and confusion, inquiring about the timing of her next visit. The scene shifted to Espen's room, where she lay on the bed completely absent-minded, prompting her nanny Diana to ask anxiously if something happened again with His Highness the Prince. The nanny noticed Espen had been unconscious all day, So Espen answered slowly while still under shock, admitting something strange actually happened. She recalled the image of Luciano wondering when she would come again, and although she had waited long for the moment Luciano looked for her first, his tone didn't seem full of joy as she imagined. She couldn't understand the reason behind this sudden change in his attitude, so she asked him directly if he didn't hate seeing her. She told him their relationship had been one-sided since their first meeting, prompting Espen to ask him about the reason for his sudden talk about meeting again. He turned his face away from her, answering in a faint voice that it fell within his responsibility, explaining that the bad events that befell her recently were because of him. Espen asked him in confusion what he meant, so he told her the explanation would be too long, suggesting she come another time if she wanted to hear the details. Espen noticed his hesitation and asked if he wanted her to stay longer, but he denied it quickly. Espen reassured him she was fine despite his worry, and there was no need to force himself to spend time with her out of duty, reminding him he endured her one-sided persistence for over a year, and she didn't intend to bother him anymore. Suddenly, Luciano put his hand on the door to stop her from leaving, denying she was a nuisance to him. He looked at her seriously, saying 1 year wasn't enough, asking her to try harder, and set a meeting date for the day after tomorrow at 2 p.m. Espen returned to tell her nanny what happened in amazement, wondering what he really expected from her. She lay on the bed in confusion, thinking about his contradictory behavior, pushing her away when she approaches and holding on to her when she tries to leave, although she had resolved not to care about the matter anymore. She remembered how she previously tried to win Luciano's heart by playing the bright heroine role, but she gave that up, realizing then that reckless interference in the story's path without preparation brings harm to others. Recalling Luciano's injury and the difficult situation her parents were put in before the Empress, so she strove to minimize her meetings with him as much as possible. Espen exploded in a fit of childish grumbling, wondering what she should do in the face of his sudden actions. Nanny Diana looked at her tenderly, suggesting quietly that perhaps she didn't know the reason for his change, but the sincerity of her feelings might have finally reached him. Espen thought about his words, urging her to try harder, surprised by the difficulty of him expressing his desire to see her frankly, and wondered deep down if he truly wanted to get close to her. Meanwhile, Luciano was sipping tea quietly in his palace, suggesting the beginning of a real change in his feelings. Espen noticed Prince Luciano offered her tea again today, sparking her curiosity. She asked him hesitantly if he hated eating or drinking with others, to which he replied with surprise, pointing out he offered her tea before, reminding her she complained when he didn't and now grumbles when he does. Espen explained the problem wasn't the act itself, but the cold and indifferent reaction accompanying it always. She went back in her memory, remembering how he looked at her sternly and cruelly when she brought him muffins last time. She compared that situation with his current behavior, finding he changed a lot as if becoming a completely different person, making her wonder about the size of the burden he carried toward her to drive him to this radical change. She decided to return to their previous conversation topic, reminding him he said what happened to her was his responsibility, deducing from his words that she suffered several misfortunes because of him, not just one. Luciano admitted the correctness of her deduction, but Espen wasn't aware of the nature of the harm that befell her, so she asked him to clarify. Luciano pretended to think for a moment, then claimed simply he forgot, justifying that by saying she said she didn't need him to take responsibility, which angered Espen, who shouted in his face, disapproving of his manipulation of her feelings and worry. Luciano put the teacup aside quietly, admitting he was joking, but returned to confirm seriously that if she didn't feel she was harmed, there was no need to tell her. He justified his position that knowing the truth would make her think about it and suffer later, which he didn't want. He asked her to ignore his sensitive reaction at that time and continue acting naturally as if nothing happened. While he was speaking, Espen noticed something strange in his manner, interrupting him, suddenly noting his way of speaking was different from usual. Luciano was surprised by her observation and asked what she meant. Espen asked him in amazement if he was addressing her just now in a formal or polite form, noting he never called her by her name properly before, but used vague reference words. Luciano smiled, saying it was impressive she continued visiting him despite realizing that, and Espen tried to interrupt him so he wouldn't change the subject. Luciano explained honestly he decided to show a measure of respect to her because she proved to be an honest and loyal person. Espen felt confused and shy from this sudden appreciation, wondering when she started receiving this generous view from him. She imagined a cute image of him offering her something, asking herself if this change stemmed from the muffin incident. She asked him hesitantly if he was referring to that old incident, while thinking inside she couldn't say, "When I ate the muffins and vomited." Frankly, Luciano confirmed her thought, saying he realized in that moment she possessed true courage. Luciano continued explaining that although everyone was against him in that situation, she didn't cast blame on him even once. but considered her collapse her fault entirely. Espen felt embarrassed, wondering secretly if her shameful behavior then was considered courage in his eyes, and if she should be happy about this misunderstanding or not. She closed her eyes, thinking she truly wished they would get closer, but never intended to burden him with any responsibility. She looked at him, seeing in his eyes the look of someone who trusted no one before, but was now extending his hand toward her, so she couldn't help but accept this extended hand. She asked him shyly while rubbing her hands if they were friends now. Luciano looked at her, asking if he had to say it out loud, so Espen confirmed enthusiastically that such matters must be said clearly and directly. Luciano smiled sincerely, saying clearly he wanted her to become his friend. Espen contemplated his smiling face, amazed at his ability to smile so beautifully. She felt warmth flooding her heart, as if everything was okay, and accepting his friendship was the right thing. With a bright smile filled with happiness, she asked him for one last request to seal this friendship, which was to call her by her name, Espen, instead of you. Luciano asked Espen for her name, looking at her seriously. She answered enthusiastically, but quickly felt strange when he called her you instead of her name, expressing that the word you seemed very distant between friends. She commented that calling her you seemed cliché every time she heard it, sparking Luciano's surprise. She thought to herself this was natural because he was still a 10-year-old child, making him put his hand on his forehead in despair at her frankness. Espen encouraged him with a broad smile to call her by her name comfortably, urging him to try, asking him to try saying Espen. Luciano hesitated a little, then pronounced her name in a faint and hesitant voice. Espen felt overwhelmed with happiness and blushed, as if she achieved a great achievement. Luciano asked in surprise about the reason for her exaggerated reaction after he finally pronounced her name. Espen laughed shyly, admitting she didn't expect him to actually say it, causing Luciano to comment with annoyance on her lack of trust in him. Espen admitted to herself she always felt he didn't resemble children, but seeing this reaction confirmed to her he was indeed still small. Espen smiled happily, expressing her admiration that he looked his age. Since that day, Luciano began accepting Espen's spontaneous and informal behavior without showing any annoyance. They reached a stage of familiarity where they played chess together, where Luciano won a checkmate round. Espen grumbled at her loss and asked for another round, but Luciano refused and suggested doing something else, reminding her of the bet. Espen insisted on carrying out the bet, asking him to hit her forehead as punishment for the loser, closing her eyes nervously. Luciano refused at first, but Espen insisted, saying a bet is a bet. She waited for the hit, feeling nervous, wondering how strong a 10-year-old boy's hit was. She commented that Luciano, despite his young age, is actually strong, being the novel's hero. At the same time, she wondered if her forehead would swell and bruise after being hit. Suddenly, she felt a very light touch on her forehead. She opened her eyes in amazement, asking if he just hit her, to which Luciano answered simply in the affirmative. Espen objected, saying this wasn't a real hit, and she would consider the bet void if he didn't hit her properly. But Luciano reassured her that wouldn't happen and asked what they wanted to do next. Espen realized Luciano had started treating her with unprecedented kindness, even going easy on her in the bet, and felt their relationship became more comfortable than she imagined. Overwhelming happiness flooded her to the point she forgot for a moment the tragic situation of the first prince in the original novel. After a few days at the Imperial Palace, Espen felt suddenly hungry. Luciano asked if she wanted something to eat, suggesting making tea, but Espen told him that wouldn't fill her, hinting at her desire for a snack. Luciano asked her to wait a moment and stood up. Espen watched him heading toward a side cabinet, surprised he kept snacks in his room. Luciano returned, carrying a shiny red apple, and offered it to her. Espen sat on the sofa looking at the apple in amazement, while Luciano told her simply he brought her an apple since she said she was hungry. Espen noticed an unpeeled apple, surprised the prince, left the dessert behind, wondering inwardly if the reason was his unwillingness to eat it like this. She received the apple from Prince Luciano and thanked him with stammering and confusion. Espen thought Luciano didn't keep many people around him, but found it strange there wasn't a single person to peel fruit for him. Her astonishment increased when she realized he hid fruit in his room, wondering suspiciously if he was forced to secure his food himself. She asked him anxiously, seeing him eating the apple with its peel, if he ate his main meals this way too. To which he answered with serious features that chefs were easy to bribe. Espen was stunned, realizing he had been taking care of his meals himself all this time because he didn't trust the palace chefs. She deduced his skill in making tea was because he always did it himself and didn't allow anyone to serve him. She realized the magnitude of suffering he lived through because of Isabel, who made him doubt even the people working in his palace for fear of poison. Espen jumped up, suddenly realizing the situation was more dangerous than she imagined, confirming to herself he needed to eat good food in this growth phase. She grabbed his hand firmly, asking him to leave with her for a moment because this situation couldn't be ignored. He asked her in amazement what she was doing, so she dragged him behind her, saying enthusiastically to go eat something delicious. They arrived at the Samuel family mansion gate, where the butler welcomed the return of the little miss. Espen asked him to prepare a luxurious dinner tonight because she brought a guest with her. Luciano wondered about the reason for bringing him to the Samuel family home with this haste and strangeness. The butler recognized Prince Luciano immediately, and his features changed to amazement. He bowed with extreme respect, expressing his honor to receive this distinguished guest, while Luciano apologized politely for the sudden visit without prior notice. The servant told them regretfully that the Count and Countess were currently not at the mansion. Espen answered quickly that it didn't matter. She didn't come to see her parents, emphasizing only to ensure food was prepared with extreme care. Luciano whispered to Espen nervously that this matter was very sudden, and he felt he caused her a nuisance. Espen replied firmly that it had to be sudden to be safe. She explained that since it was a spontaneous and unplanned outing, no one had the chance to interfere or poison the food. Luciano looked at her in amazement, comprehending her wit and extreme concern for his safety. Espen smiled at him, gently inviting him to enter quickly, saying everything would be fine. Delicious dishes of grilled meat with special sauce and octopus cooked with potatoes and olive oil were served. Luciano sat hesitantly before the table, so Espen urged him to try, confirming their chef was very skilled. Luciano ate a piece of meat, so Espen asked him with anticipation and anxiety about its taste. His face reddened slightly, and his eyes widened, saying the taste was different. Espen worried, thinking he meant by different that it wasn't delicious. But he explained honestly he didn't know how to describe it. It was just different from what he used to eat. Espen looked at him with pity, wondering how long he spent without eating a proper and safe meal, feeling deep sadness for him every time this happened. Espen suggested to Prince Luciano enthusiastically that they eat together like this often in the future. Luciano refused the idea, seriously looking down, explaining that couldn't happen because it would be extremely dangerous. Espen approached him, trying to persuade him, explaining they could move suddenly as they did today, adding smartly that the meeting didn't have to be at her home, but they could go to any restaurant, as it would be difficult to bribe all the capital's restaurants at once. Luciano sank into thought for a moment, hesitant before her logic, before finally agreeing, saying it was fine if it happened sometimes only. Espen's features brightened with a broad smile, and she shouted with overwhelming happiness, asking if he really meant it, reminding him he made a promise, inviting him to eat lots of delicious food together. Luciano looked at her with a warm and calm gaze, confirming in a faint voice in the affirmative that it was a promise. The scene shifted suddenly to a gloomy and dark atmosphere inside a luxurious but depressing bedroom, where a man's voice was heard calling Harrison, asking if he was there, to which Harrison, standing by the bed, answered in the affirmative. A frail hand extended from the bed, and the father asked with a tired voice for his son to fulfill this last request for his unworthy father, hoping to see that person even for just one time. Harrison sat by the bed with his head bowed, while his father continued speaking, expressing his desire to apologize for the sins he committed against that person when he was young. A picture of Luciano at a younger age appeared on the table, while the father continued his deep and painful apology. Harrison held his father's hand, asking his father with a choked voice to stop talking about this matter now. Harrison lifted his pale face, his green eyes overflowing with pain and despair, then addressed his father, confirming he knew better than anyone else they didn't even have the right to hear any news about him. The atmosphere returned to brightness again, as time passed quickly, and 2 whole years elapsed in the blink of an eye since those events. Espen enjoyed the sound of clinking gold, coins falling, noting she had been organizing the original novel's content throughout that period. Espen held a gold coin, contemplating it with love, noting her rabbit piggy bank, Tucson, had become heavy with coins, and she came to value one thing above all else. Espen, now 11 years old, appeared holding a gold coin with a broad smile and shining eyes, addressing the gold coins that they were sparkling today too. Espen announced her motto in life with extreme enthusiasm: money, confirming her supreme goal was saving money after accepting her life as Espen Samuel. She recalled memories of how she worked hard over the past 2 years to collect as much money as possible, even asking for her allowance from her father. to be able to exploit all the information she knew from the original novel. Espen revealed the first investment she finally decided to make, which was the Maybell sweet shop that stole everyone's hearts in the capital according to the original novel's events. Espen held a letter explaining she asked the Adventurers Guild to find the residents of the concerned people, expressing satisfaction that the investigation ended already with amazing speed. Espen put a large amount of gold coins in a cloth bag, thinking if she was going to pay the commission and plan to persuade them with investment money, she had to bring at least this amount. The nanny noticed Espen preparing to go out, asking if she was heading to the bank because her piggy bank, Tucson, was about to explode. Espen answered with an innocent smile she wasn't going to the bank today, changing the nanny's features to amazement. The nanny's eyes widened in overwhelming shock and her jaw dropped in astonishment, screaming, asking if she would spend the money, while Espen wondered in surprise if using her own money was shocking to this degree. The nanny ran frantically in the hallway, screaming at the top of her voice, calling the master and mistress, telling them the urgent news, while Espen tried to stop her in vain. The nanny burst into the Count and Countess's office, shocking the father when he heard his daughter would spend money. Everyone recalled their memories of Espen, where she had until now asked for her allowance in gold coins only, and whenever she had the chance, she fed her piggy bank Tucson, those coins telling her father Tucson loved gold coins. They remembered how she massaged her father's shoulders very gently just to ask him for her allowance afterwards, then deposited every coin in the bank, never withdrawing a single one. The father imagined Espen sitting happily atop a huge pile of gold coins, while her parents wondered in shock if Espen was a greedy person. Espen stood amazed at their exaggerated reaction, muttering with disapproval about the title, Greedy Espen, admonishing them internally that this title was a bit cruel, especially since she was their only daughter. The father asked his daughter Espen with a tone full of curiosity and worry about her real plans for using that money she collected with difficulty. Espen winked playfully, answering with a broad smile that it was a secret. The mother sighed in resignation before her persistence, telling her wanting to buy something was good, but warned her seriously against spending everything she owned at once. Espen reassured her parents, confirming she fully realized the value of money and its importance to her, so her mother agreed. The mother intervened to give strict instructions before her daughter went out, stressing the necessity of holding Billy's hand all the time, warning her she would be punished by staying home if she wandered alone again, to which Espen agreed obediently. Espen bade them farewell with enthusiasm and happiness, announcing her departure to execute her plan. The carriage arrived at its destination in front of the Adventurers Guild building, and Espen thanked guard Billy for the ride. Billy, the former mercenary turned carriage driver, asked politely if she was ready to enter. Espen remembered her mother's instructions, holding Billy's hand with a bright smile and answering in the affirmative. Espen entered the guild, approaching the reception desk, asking to meet Miss Delia, telling the employee to mention the name Espen Samuel to her, and she would know her immediately. Espen walked in the hallway, noticing the place was completely empty, recalling what was said that only registered adventurers used this place, but it really seemed empty. She glimpsed two men standing idly, deducing internally that this lack of activity was the reason the guild was in the lowest ranks. Espen thought this situation was unfortunate for the guild, but represented a golden opportunity for her, hoping she could continue working with them after today, wondering about Delia's feeling toward her request. Delia, the Adventurers Guildmaster, appeared welcoming Miss Espen after an absence. Delia placed a paper on the table, telling Espen it contained address information for the two people she asked to search for, setting the price at 5 gold coins. Espen was hit with overwhelming shock, screaming in amazement at this high price. She closed her eyes in pain, feeling the price was more expensive than expected, desiring strongly to haggle, but realized negotiating in her first request wouldn't be in her favor and wouldn't win her points. She tried to console herself, reminding herself this was all an investment for the future, and she shouldn't be stingy now, taking out the coin bag with a heart squeezed in pain. She placed the 5 gold coins on the table before Delia, who watched her quietly. Delia asked in surprise if she wouldn't verify the accuracy of the information in the paper first. Espen smiled confidently, answering that the investigation was simple and about ordinary people, so she doubted Delia would deceive her in something like this. While Delia examined the coins, Espen opened the paper to read the address. Surprised the concerned people lived closer than she thought, Delia lifted her head, asking Espen politely for permission to ask a question, so Espen allowed her. Delia admitted this was the first time the guild received a request from someone outside the guild circle, causing her to feel a little surprised at Espen's arrival. Delia asked curiously why she tasked them with a simple information-gathering mission instead of resorting to the information guild specialized in that. Espen smiled broadly, explaining this was the question she was waiting for, admitting secret investigations were usually the information guild's specialty, but she hesitated to go to them currently. Espen's features changed to seriousness, explaining the reason, noting the Information Guild ultimately belonged to Damien, the mastermind working in the shadows. Espen explained that she, as a person needing an information network to fill the gaps in the original novel, found the Adventurers Guild with its wide movement range and independence offered the best conditions to receive requests away from the Information Guild. She added confidently that if things went well, this would benefit Delia too. A struggling guild suffering financial deficit could find an income from external requests a way to rise again. Espen concluded her speech smartly, claiming she heard the Information Guild didn't care about methods or ethics, and she didn't feel comfortable dealing with such a place. Then asked Delia if her request was difficult for the Adventurers Guild. Delia assured Espen it wasn't difficult at all, rather seeing accepting external requests worth considering as a type of extra work. Delia asked Espen if she would visit their guild again if something else came up, so Espen thought enthusiastically, confirming she built a good relationship with the Adventurers Guild. Realizing internally, Delia quickly grasped the benefit of exploiting the guild's strengths in her favor. Espen expressed her feeling of reassurance to continue submitting requests to them, looking forward to working with them in the future with a bright smile. Delia smiled too, saying it would be a new challenge for the guild, and she looked forward to that as well. Espen left feeling satisfied because things went well with the Adventurers Guild, deciding to head immediately to meet her future business partners. Espen arrived at a simple house greeting with a broad smile, introducing herself to two ladies standing there. Espen recognized them, Miss May with red hair and Miss Bell with brown hair. The two ladies asked in surprise about her identity and how a noble lady like her knew their names. Espen concocted a quick excuse claiming she was looking for the best bakers in the area, and everyone recommended them. Thinking internally, she couldn't tell the truth she investigated them, so she preferred keeping it vague. May expressed doubt about that alleged recommendation, saying that couldn't be true, wondering seriously about the real reason for Espen coming to them. Espen revealed her intentions, saying she was currently looking for places to invest for the future, suggesting enthusiastically they open a sweets shop. She offered them confidently to take care of everything, confirming no need to worry about startup costs or initial operating funds because she would cover all that. Espen told herself she saved all that money for this specific day. Confident capital was everything, and they wouldn't refuse such a good offer. But the reaction came hesitant as May asked with sweat beads dripping if Espen wanted them to sell their baked goods to other people. Then she apologized with regret, saying they couldn't accept this offer, causing Espen amazement and shock. Espen screamed, wondering about the reason for refusal despite covering costs. So May answered simply, baking was just a hobby for them. Espen panicked internally, realizing the original novel didn't mention the exact opening date of Maybell's shop, but she thought they were considering opening now given their high skills sufficient to dominate the capital. Espen realized if she retreated now just by broaching the subject, it would be difficult to try again later. While the two ladies whispered to each other about the necessity of dismissing her, Espen decided she had no choice but to persuade them somehow, clutching her clothes nervously. She clenched her fists with enthusiasm and determination, resolved deep down to climb that mountain of money with them, whatever the cost. The scene shifted to the prince's palace kitchen, where cooking tools and flowers appeared in a warm atmosphere. Luciano, now 12 years old, appeared wearing a cooking apron, kneading dough skillfully. Luciano asked Espen if this amount of dough was enough, but Espen stood completely absent-minded, not answering, so Luciano called her name to pay attention. Espen paid attention suddenly, so Luciano asked in surprise what she meant by her lost looks, explaining he was trying to talk to her the whole time. Espen apologized with a tense smile, saying she was lost in thought for a moment. Luciano reproached her because she was late for their appointment today too, asking if something was wrong, noting she mentioned meeting someone, asking seriously if she was thinking about them now. Espen denied that, trying to change the subject by praising the dough and asking him to mince garlic, but Luciano asked her seriously not to change the subject. Espen insisted while bowing her head she was only a little tired, and that was all. Luciano took the garlic bowl and she asked him to hurry, crushing it, still trying to evade the answer. Luciano stared at Espen with silent, reproachful looks, and Espen immediately realized he was sulking again. telling herself this was always his habit when she felt he was hiding something from her, or when she was hiding something from him. Espen continued her internal monologue while noticing his annoyed facial expressions, while he stood before her in the kitchen with dissatisfied features, trying to avoid looking directly into her eyes. Luciano turned his body away from her with clear distress, so she asked him in a sharp tone what she just said to him. Espen pointed her finger at him, advising him enthusiastically, confirming that he must be a skilled cook to become perfect husband material, adding that this was the way he would win his future wife's love. She pressed him with the question with a sly smile, wondering if he didn't want his wife to love him in the future. So Luciano trembled slightly from the effect of her words. Luciano finally surrendered to her persistence and agreed with blushing and shy features, saying he would do it, while Espen felt triumphant because she knew this trick would work with him. Espen recalled her memories, thinking that Luciano was extremely cautious and reserved at first too, and didn't open up to her until a long time passed, and she showed him her sincere feelings. She returned to reality thinking about her current problem, and deduced that her only option now was to continue visiting May and Belle to gain their trust. Espen reached her destination, and guard Billy announced their arrival, so she told him she would return soon. Espen walked toward the shop, thinking that a week had already passed since she started visiting them, hoping to get a positive answer today. She noticed with surprise that the shop door was unusually open. A delicious smell sneaked into her nose, so she realized they were baking bread now, and considered that perfect timing to try a new approach in persuasion. She opened the door forcefully and entered with extreme enthusiasm, waving her hand, announcing loudly that she came to invest. May sighed helplessly upon seeing Espen, and asked her with tired features if it was time for her to give up, pointing to her repeated visits. Espen pretended to be moved and described her words as hurtful, confirming her total confidence that they made the best sweets. But she corrected herself seriously, admitting she understood why it was difficult for them to trust her, especially since she hadn't tasted their bread even once before. Based on that, Espen requested, gently, to be allowed to join their tea time today. Espen smiled enthusiastically, suggesting this was a good opportunity to try the bread Belle made, and added she brought some garlic bread she baked herself to share together. The atmosphere changed suddenly, and May asked in a strange and serious tone if Espen really wanted to taste her bread. Espen noticed the sudden change in atmosphere, where Belle's features became dark and extremely fearful while May held her hand anxiously. Espen asked with tension and confusion if she said something wrong, but May denied that in a faint voice. Espen stared at Belle's face, telling herself her facial expressions were too dark to ignore, and wondered if her presence was the reason or if there was something else. She saw terror in Belle's eyes, and wondered secretly if the girl hated others tasting the bread she made. Espen deduced that if that was the case, this explained their categorical refusal to open a shop, but she remained puzzled about the reason that might lead to that. May invited Espen to sit suddenly, which amazed Espen. May asked Belle to serve the bread to the lady, and when Belle hesitated and asked if she was sure, May answered her firmly that it would be faster if Espen tried it herself. Espen asked for permission and sat at the table, while watching the situation with caution and curiosity. Belle told her with a sad look she would understand the reason behind their lack of intention to open a shop when she tasted the bread, and added seriously that once she realized the matter, she begged her to leave without uttering a word. So Espen looked at her with serious features. Espen looked at the brownie piece placed before her, thinking it looked completely normal in terms of appearance, and wondered with curiosity and anxiety about the taste that might drive May to say something like this. Espen ate the dessert piece with anticipation, and as soon as she put it in her mouth, her eyes widened in amazement. She put the fork aside and stared at the plate disbelievingly, wondering in shock how a brownie piece of this perfection could exist in this world. She felt the rich chocolate flavor exploding in her mouth, mixed with a light and wonderful touch of banana, and a soft texture melting without leaving any sticky trace, describing it as truly perfect. But Belle's reaction came contrary to expectations, as she looked at her with fear and pleading, telling her not to lie to her, accusing Espen of just flattering her to accept the investment. Espen jumped up angry at this accusation, confirming loudly she was extremely strict regarding food and could never flatter in its taste, betting her name that this was the most delicious brownie she tasted in her life. May looked at her friend in amazement, while Belle stood frozen in place, not comprehending what she heard. Tears suddenly streamed from Belle's eyes as she covered her mouth, muttering she couldn't believe that. Belle confessed with a shaky voice she never heard in her life anything other than what she made was the worst ever, making Espen feel shock and pity toward her. Espen sat to listen to Belle's painful story. Memory went back a few years, where Belle worked as an apprentice baker in a large sweets shop in the capital, but the head baker there, named Pam, was an extremely cruel and sharp-tongued character. Pam constantly scolded Belle, accusing her of lacking originality and talent, and destroying her self-confidence with hurtful words, asking who would pay money to eat what she made. Belle endured those difficult times by relying on her fiancé, who was her only refuge. She worked hard and diligently, wishing to deliver good news to that kind man. But one day, her fiancé suddenly demanded to break the engagement, telling her he found someone else, and the shock was that his new girlfriend was Pam, the head baker who tortured her. He didn't stop there, but directed words at her that broke her heart more than the betrayal itself, asking her coldly if it was time for her to give up making sweets. And he dealt the finishing blow by saying what she made was considered garbage compared to what Pam made, which destroyed her soul completely. Espen hit the table with her fist, forcefully in anger in the present, screaming that that man was the real garbage for daring to say something like that. Belle tried to calm the situation with a sad smile, saying everyone had their own taste, and she was just happy Espen liked what she made. Espen asked Belle not to give up on her dream because of people like them, assuring her with total confidence that her sweets wouldn't just suffice with success in the capital, but would shake the hearts of everyone in the entire empire. Belle looked at her with hesitation and disbelief, unable to comprehend this amount of confidence and praise. Espen decided to settle the matter, proposing to them suddenly to make a bet with a sly smile. She explained her plan to display May and Belle's sweets at the upcoming Apple Day festival, betting on their ability to sell 100 sweet pieces. May was surprised by the sudden proposal, wondering in amazement if Espen was serious in her words after hearing Belle's story. Espen set the bet conditions, explaining that if they failed to sell more than 100 pieces, she would stop coming and offering investment, and wouldn't interfere in their affairs again, and added her counter-condition enthusiastically, which was that in case she won and achieved the sales, they must promise her to open the shop with her. She extended her hand toward them, with a confident and bright smile, asking them their opinion on this fair offer. Finally, the day of Apology or Apple Day arrived, and May and Belle's stall appeared prepared amidst the crowds. Espen pointed out that Apology Day comes on the last day of every month, where people give each other small gifts to apologize, and small sweets and cute things are very common on this day. Espen appeared standing in front of the stall in elegant and attractive clothes, promoting enthusiastically a box of colorful macarons shaped like cute animals, inviting everyone to try them, and confirming their cuteness would melt the heart of anyone receiving the apology immediately. Sounds of the crowd rose with amazement and admiration around the stall, as they were attracted by the cute macaron shapes made in the form of small animals like rabbits and frogs. The looks of anxiety that were on May and Belle's faces changed gradually, as people scrambled to order the sweets and try them immediately, and Espen participated enthusiastically in fulfilling orders and distributing sweets to customers. Espen felt a great victory, for her prediction came completely true, and the sweets attracted everyone's attention in moments, causing sales to rise insanely as she told them previously. May and Belle stood amazed at the overwhelming positive reaction, as praise poured on their sweets from every side, and people described them as the best ever. Belle's cheeks reddened with shyness and emotion, disbelieving people really loved what her hands made, wondering inwardly in amazement at what was happening. Belle listened to customers' comments, where one lady suggested buying more, while a little girl confirmed the taste was very delicious, planting in Belle's heart a strong desire to find courage and self-confidence. Belle put her hand on her chest, deeply moved, and whispered to May that one piece wouldn't be enough because the taste was so wonderful, and finally realized her work wasn't garbage as she was told before. May approached her friend, inviting more customers to come closer and try, while Belle became certain there were people who actually appreciated and loved her baked goods. Billy and Espen watched the scene from a close distance with a smile of satisfaction, happy with the two girls' success. Billy praised Espen's insight, admitting he was skeptical at first when she proposed the investment idea, but the business was indeed flourishing exactly as she predicted. Espen took pride in herself, saying she had a keen eye for people, and she knew those two would achieve success. So Billy agreed with her, describing her judgment as amazing. Billy suggested leaving the rest to May and Belle, since victory became guaranteed, and invited her to go search for gifts themselves. So Espen agreed. While walking, Espen asked guard, Billy, if he had someone he needed to apologize to on Apology Day, to which he answered there were a few people, but he was confident she had many more people than him to apologize to. Espen disapproved of his statement, but he explained his meaning jokingly that the number of people dragged into her chaos wasn't just one or two, so Espen fell silent for a bit. Espen wandered the market looking for a suitable gift, thinking of buying something edible or usable, and glimpsed some beautiful flowers but retreated because they wither quickly. Espen wondered in confusion about the type of gift people choose with extreme care on such a day. Billy asked for permission to take a look around nearby, while Billy's eyes fell on a stall selling colorful accessories. Billy approached the stall and picked up some pieces, so Espen asked him slyly if the gift was for a lady, because she would love this kind of thing. She asked him curiously if the gift was for someone from the palace, so Billy denied that explaining it was for someone he caused trouble for at the bar last time, so Espen insisted he tell her what happened. Suddenly, Espen felt immense pressure and a powerful aura approaching her, so she turned to see a person standing beside her. She wondered in internal panic if a bear had descended from the mountains, seeing a huge-built young man. Espen was amazed by the hugeness of his body, noticing he seemed even huger than Billy, and wondered what kind of physical build this was. She scrutinized his face, finding he seemed young, perhaps only 3 or 4 years older than her, or maybe he was an adult with childish features, which confused her. The young man noticed her looks and turned toward her with his golden eyes, so Espen panicked and turned her face away quickly in shyness. She scolded herself because staring at people was considered rude, but she couldn't stop herself from curiosity, while her face reddened with shyness. She returned her gaze to the table to find wish bracelets and read the sign saying, "The wish comes true if the bracelet breaks while wearing it." 2 bracelets caught her attention, one pink and the other brown, and she thought it was just a superstition, but the colors reminded her exactly of Luciano and herself. Espen decided enthusiastically to buy the bracelet and asked the seller about its price. The seller told her the price was 5 fantasy coins for each one, so she asked him to wrap one and that she would take the other now, while Harrison stood beside her watching the situation. Espen turned, suddenly holding the bracelet, finding Harrison standing right behind her looking at her, which struck her with surprise and confusion. The saleswoman apologized to Harrison with regret, explaining the bracelet was handmade and it was the only piece available, so Espen asked Harrison standing beside her if he intended to buy it. Espen was surprised when she learned he wanted to buy the bracelet, so she told Harrison she intended to give it to a friend as an apology gift, but offered him kindly to take it since he was looking for an apology gift too. Harrison stopped talking suddenly and his features changed, staring ahead, while Espen noticed something familiar in his facial expressions. Harrison refused the offer, stammering, and thanked her, but Espen noticed tears gathering in his eyes and wondered secretly in shock if he was crying now. Espen panicked greatly and screamed, asking the reason for his sudden crying, afraid she might have committed a mistake against him unintentionally. Billy appeared suddenly, accusing her of making a stranger cry as soon as he looked away from her for a moment, so Espen screamed, denying that strongly and defending herself. Billy put his hand on his chest in pain and sadness, while Espen tried to clarify the situation to Billy, saying she didn't do anything, and Billy apologized to the young man if she hurt his feelings. Harrison intervened quickly to defend Espen, confirming to Billy she didn't commit any mistake, but on the contrary, was so kind she offered to give up the piece she wanted to buy. Espen tried to explain the situation to Billy, saying she didn't know the full sad story, but the young man bursting into tears suddenly made people misunderstand her, so Harrison apologized to her. Espen contemplated the young man's features, noticing his blonde hair and green eyes, telling herself he reminded her of Luciano for some reason, perhaps because of his hair color. Espen felt a strange feeling preventing her from leaving him and simply walking away, as if a hidden link pulled her to him. Espen asked him with empathy and spontaneity if the apology he needed to give was extremely difficult, given his affected state. The young man looked at her silently, then his eyes overflowed with tears again, making Espen feel sorry and embarrassed because she caused him to cry again. Billy thought quietly they should step aside and leave the young man alone, while Espen tried to console him, telling him not to worry, justifying that because today was Apple Day, designated for apology. Espen smiled a bright and hopeful smile, confirming to the young man that if he apologized sincerely, the other person would definitely forgive him. The young man looked at Espen, moved by her words. He spoke to himself in pain, wondering if he apologized with all his heart and feelings. Could he really be forgiven? He focused his gaze toward Espen, and doubts possessed him about the possibility of that happening in reality. Harrison revealed in his secret thoughts his shocking truth, admitting he was the son of the man who pushed Luciano into hell, yet wondered if forgiveness was possible. Events shifted after that, as Espen narrated those days were unexpectedly full of tears. She recalled the first situation, where the man she met on Apple Day burst into tears in front of her suddenly. Then she remembered the second situation, which was tears of joy shed by both Belle and May after their overwhelming success in selling sweets. And finally, Espen admitted the last person who ended up crying was herself. The scene returned to the palace, where Espen's mother stood angry and scolded her severely, reminding her she asked her to hold Billy's hand tightly when outside. It turned out she got lost in the crowd and almost caused a missing child report. Espen remembered when she first reincarnated in this body, she was fascinated by the romantic fantasy novel Streets to the point she wandered with curiosity and slipped away from her parents, making her mother very strict in these matters. Her mother scolded her sharply, asking her if she realized the extent of the shock they lived when Billy told them of her disappearance, and announced she wouldn't overlook this matter today. The mother issued her harsh verdict, announcing banning Espen from going out for a full month as punishment. Espen was hit with overwhelming shock and screamed in horror, objecting to the punishment duration, and begged her mother not to do that. But despite her desperate protests and pleas, the mother remained firm in her decision, and Espen had no choice but to remain locked inside the mansion for a full month. Finally, after the long punishment month passed, Espen returned to visit the palace again. Espen wandered inside the palace wearing an elegant red dress and a hat, searching for Prince Luciano everywhere, but found no trace of him. Espen carried a surprise gift for him, telling herself anxiously because his room was empty, and she didn't find him in the office either. Suddenly, a sharp and strong voice stopped her coming from behind a closed door, asking strictly who gave permission to enter here. Espen froze in place and realized immediately this voice belonged to Luciano. She realized the voice came from the reception room and wished secretly he didn't have a guest in the meantime. Espen recalled in her mind the fact that everyone visiting Luciano didn't come with good intentions, and there was no such thing as a welcome guest for him. She heard Luciano screaming from inside, scolding someone sharply, asking him when he asked him to bring this garbage, confirming Espen's suspicions that the guest was not welcome at all. So she hesitated to enter, wondering if she should wait until their conversation ended. She put her hand on the doorknob, thinking of another option, which was intervening now and standing by Luciano to save him from this situation. The door, he opened suddenly, finding Luciano screaming in his guest's face, ordering him to leave immediately because he couldn't stand seeing his face. But he was surprised by Espen's sudden entry. Espen tripped and fell to the floor during her impulsive entry, and Luciano looked at her in amazement. Espen sat on the floor feeling extremely embarrassed, realizing she appeared again at the worst possible timing. She apologized quickly while still on the floor, explaining she wasn't eavesdropping, but felt worried that harm had befallen His Highness. Luciano asked the guest coldly why he was standing and staring like that, telling him he opened the door so he could leave. Espen glimpsed the other person and heard his voice, and a feeling of familiarity with that tone took over her. Harrison stood holding a large gift box, asking with a sad and broken voice where he should leave the gift. Espen recognized him immediately. He was the young man she met in the market previously, and wondered in amazement why he was here in the palace. Luciano replied cruelly, telling him he didn't need such a trivial gift and ordered him to leave, pointing to the presence of another guest, Espen, and that he wasn't being considerate of that. Harrison pressed the box with his hand tightly, while the prince asked him that perhaps he was the one who should leave instead of him. But the young man settled the matter and decided to leave, apologizing politely for his lack of taste, carrying his rejected gift in his hands. Luciano extended his hand to help Espen get up, ordering her to stand, while the young man left the room with his head bowed. Espen watched the young man's back as he left, wondering to herself about the identity of this noble who possessed a character allowing him to apologize to Luciano in this way. Suddenly, the truth flashed in her mind, and she gasped in shock when she realized his true identity. He was Luciano's cousin, and the second male lead in the original novel. Espen connected the events together, realizing the similarity in their hair color wasn't a coincidence, and he was indeed Harrison. Harrison Olindo appeared in Espen's imagination as a noble knight, where texts indicate that in the future he would spend his whole life as a loyal knight and master beside Luciano. But she also realized the reason behind Luciano's categorical and fierce rejection of him currently. Espen recalled the fact that Harrison was the son of the cousin who tried to poison Luciano when he was young, explaining the extreme hostility. Although Harrison wasn't directly involved in that heinous incident, but Luciano, whenever he faced Harrison, was forced to remember that traumatic event which made him unable to trust others and felt suffocation and psychological pain. Espen looked into Luciano's eyes filled with shadows, realizing with sorrow that even if Harrison came to apologize on behalf of his father, this wasn't something Luciano could accept easily. Espen wondered in confusion about the reason for Harrison's appearance at this early timing, as he was supposed to appear after a few years according to the original story, and she was surprised more because no events occurred linking them yet, making his sudden appearance to apologize incomprehensible and suspicious matter. Suddenly, Espen comprehended the word apology mentioned by Harrison, and remembered she told him on Apple Day not to worry because that day was designated for apology. Espen was surprised her words were what encouraged him, remembering when she told him a sincere apology would definitely make the other party forgive. She put her hand over her mouth in shock, realizing she was the reason behind his early coming and changing the course of events. Espen felt terror because she caused skipping a large part of the original story, where Harrison was supposed to hesitate for a longer period before gathering his courage, but her advice made him come very early, leading to everything happening quickly and suddenly. Wondering in panic how to fix this situation. Meanwhile, Espen apologized to Luciano with a trembling voice, while Luciano looked at her in amazement, replying that he was the one who acted shamefully. Luciano remained silent with features still annoyed, so Espen decided the best she could do now was try to lighten the mood as much as possible. Espen smiled nervously, telling him she actually came because she had something she wanted to give him, asking if she could present it to him now, hoping that would contribute to fixing the relationship between them. Luciano looked at her in surprise, asking what she meant, so Espen asked him to lend her his hand for a moment. Luciano extended his hand hesitantly, so Espen tied the wish bracelet around his wrist gently. Espen explained to him enthusiastically this was a wish bracelet, and he must make a wish. And when the bracelet breaks eventually, his wish will come true. Pointing out happily, it matched the bracelet she wore too. Luciano looked at the bracelet silently, noticing its color resembled his eyes, and Espen's eyes. Luciano thanked her in a faint voice, saying he liked it. Espen felt relieved and happy because his mood improved slightly and smiled at him brightly. She asked Luciano curiously about the wish he would make, so he answered playfully that it was a secret and no one could know it. Suddenly there was a knock on the door, and Espen wondered inwardly about the identity of the person who might come to visit him this time. The atmosphere changed suddenly, as Luciano appeared receiving a sudden invitation from Empress Isabel, sparking his worry and amazement, where the Empress invited him to attend a training match to be held tomorrow. Luciano and Espen arrived at the training ground in the Imperial Palace, where the atmosphere seemed charged with tension. The Empress welcomed Luciano with a fake smile, asking him with veiled sarcasm if she summoned him too suddenly while he was busy. Espen bowed respectfully, while the prince greeted the Empress politely, and Luciano answered the time was suitable. The Empress asked with feigned curiosity about the reason for Espen's presence, so Espen answered she was visiting the palace by chance and wanted to greet Her Majesty, so she accompanied him. The Empress welcomed Espen coldly, while Espen whispered in her secret thoughts that Luciano actually asked her not to come today. And Espen wondered anxiously how she could let Luciano go alone to face the Empress's unknown schemes. The Empress explained the reason for summoning Luciano, saying she had a favor to ask of him. She pointed to her son Stephen, saying he was training in fencing recently, and thought it would be good if Luciano was his training partner. Luciano and Espen were shocked by the request. Luciano and Stephen exchanged sharp looks, where Stephen held a sword and smiled challengingly, while Luciano looked at him coldly. Espen realized the dangerous predicament, for Luciano hadn't been able to learn sword fencing since last year due to his circumstances, placing him in an extremely weak position before Stephen. Memory went back to last spring, specifically during the selection of fencing instructors for the princes, where the Knight Commander volunteered himself to train Prince Stephen. In contrast, Luciano was rejected coldly and told he wasn't qualified to learn fencing yet, leaving him standing alone and isolated in the middle of the arena without any knight accepting him as a student. The Empress was the mastermind behind this decision, but she pretended now to be innocent and unaware of the situation, asking Luciano to fulfill her request with a sly smile. Her request consisted of holding an immediate training match with Stephen, and she summoned her followers specifically to watch this event, making it look like a pre-arranged play. Espen realized clearly the Empress sought to humiliate Luciano publicly in a fight whose result was predetermined in favor of her well-trained son, so she burned with anger inside at this baseness. Espen rushed suddenly to stand between them, objecting loudly that this was unfair, but the prince signaled her to stop, while the Empress looked at her coldly and arrogantly. Luciano shook his head at Espen silently, asking her to retreat and not interfere, so she looked at him with extreme anxiety. Luciano tried to justify his objection to the Empress, pointing out he might not be the suitable opponent for Stephen because he didn't receive proper training in the sword, as everyone knew. The Empress laughed maliciously, mocking Luciano, saying she knew he swung a wooden sword alone sometimes, suggesting sarcastically he might learn something if he dueled Stephen. Espen felt a severe insult to her dignity, and Luciano's dignity. Disbelieving the Empress asked him to learn from Stephen, who was younger than him. Luciano agreed with total calmness, telling the Empress he would do his best as long as she insisted on that, while closing his eyes in resignation to the status quo. The match began, and Luciano and Stephen stood facing each other, each holding a wooden sword amidst everyone's anticipation. The Empress called Espen by name, hiding her face partially with her fan, so Espen answered cautiously. The Empress asked her with a confident and sly smile about her prediction for who would win this match, as if she was confident of Luciano's loss. Espen fell silent for a moment, then announced with a confident voice and shining eyes with a challenging smile that she believed Prince Luciano was the one who would win. The Empress's smile faded, and she looked at Espen with a sharp and annoyed look from her unexpected answer. Espen confirmed in her secret thoughts her belief in Luciano's victory, clenching her hands tightly. She summoned the fact that Luciano was the male lead of this novel, and even if he was ignored and trampled upon now, his true mettle would show. Espen bet on his innate talent mixed with his determination to win, while the fight intensified between the brothers. She expected this mixture might lead to a result no one expected, while Stephen blocked a strong blow from Luciano. The fight continued fiercely, and sounds of wooden swords rose, while attendees expressed admiration for Prince Stephen's fierce skill for his age. The Empress watched the situation with hidden anxiety, and one attendee commented, Luciano was holding up better than expected, while the two exchanged blows and attacks. The fight intensified and sparks flew, and features of seriousness and focus appeared on Luciano's face while Stephen seemed surprised. Suddenly, Luciano directed a swift and quick blow hitting Stephen, making him scream. The Empress screamed in panic, calling Stephen, while Espen gasped in amazement at the scene. The knights intervened immediately by the Empress's order to stop the fight, while Stephen stood stunned and shocked by what happened. Stephen screamed in the knights' faces with hysterical anger, ordering them not to approach him because it wasn't over yet. The knights retreated with fear and hesitation before the little prince's anger, while Stephen looked at Luciano with malice. Stephen touched his face, disbelieving, asking Luciano with overwhelming anger how he dared to put a mark on his face. Stephen drew his sword again and lunged insanely at Luciano, and the clash force was huge to the point Luciano's sword was flung away from his grip. Luciano's foot slipped suddenly, disturbing his balance at a critical moment amidst the Empress and Espen's amazement. Luciano fell to the ground forcefully outside the ring, and the referee announced immediately the match ended with Prince Stephen's victory, as expected, exploiting his opponent's fall to announce the result they wanted from the start. Stephen smiled with victory and arrogance while receiving congratulations, while Luciano remained in his place trying to comprehend his humiliating loss while still on the ground. Espen rushed with lightning speed toward Luciano, ignoring everyone's looks, while Stephen cast a look full of arrogance at her. Espen knelt beside Luciano, asking him with eagerness and anxiety if he was hurt anywhere, so he answered in a faint voice he was fine. While Stephen looked at them in surprise, the Empress called Stephen, so Stephen bragged about his win, claiming he was perfectly fine and wasn't affected by the fight. But the Empress grabbed him forcefully and reproached him, saying if he used his full power from the start, Luciano wouldn't have dared touch him, and told him she felt great disappointment in his performance. She whispered in his ear with a terrifying voice, scolding him, asking if he prepared all this to achieve such a meager victory where he allowed his opponent to touch him, so Stephen trembled in terror. Stephen apologized to his mother while turning to see how Espen was worried about Luciano. On that day, after his painful loss to Stephen, Luciano ran away from the training ground at top speed, while Espen tried to catch up with him. Luciano continued running alone until he disappeared completely from sight, leaving Espen behind, panting. Espen stood worried and confused, realizing the size of the pain squeezing his heart now. She decided between herself she wouldn't leave him to face this sadness alone and insisted on finding him. She confirmed to herself firmly that friends don't abandon each other in times like these, and started the journey of searching for him, while Stephen watched her in silence as she ran after Luciano. The Empress scolded Stephen, asking him why he stood absent-minded, telling him he would relearn basics from scratch as a type of punishment. Stephen appeared obeying orders silently with eyes filled with gloom, surrendering to his fate. Finally, Espen found Luciano's hiding place, so he flinched slightly upon hearing her voice calling him. She approached him with a warm smile, then asked him why he sat in a place like this. Luciano turned his face away from her, asking with a shaky voice to leave him alone because he wanted to stay alone. Espen refused to leave and sat beside him persistently, saying she knew that but couldn't leave him alone. She asked Luciano if he felt annoyed due to losing the match. So Luciano nodded his head affirmatively, confirming her question. She smiled at him sincerely, telling him she thought he was amazing today, and fought with courage and skill. Luciano tightened his grip on his knee forcefully, muttering with pain and heartbreak, admitting he lost in the end, noting there was nothing amazing or impressive in the matter. Espen recalled in her mind the fact that the match was unfair from the start, and Luciano realized that, and understood this was the reason for his deep feeling of embarrassment and anger, thinking with sadness that if he had received proper training, or if he managed to block Steven's sword one more time, perhaps the result would have changed. Luciano admitted with a faint voice filled with brokenness that he really wanted to win. Espen reassured Luciano with sincere words coming from the heart, confirming it was okay, expressing her total confidence he would win next time. Luciano doubted Espen's words, considering winning against Steven impossible because there was a limit to what one could learn alone, meaning the skill gap between them would only widen with time. But Espen approached him, denying that, enthusiastically confirming she saw true talent in him using the sword. And with a bright smile filled with confidence, she promised him she would do anything and everything to help him become stronger, justifying that she stood by his side always. Luciano was moved by her sincere words, and his cheeks reddened slightly, whispering her name. Then he held her hand gently, thanking her with deep gratitude. The very next day, Espen didn't waste any time and headed to the Adventurers Guild to submit an urgent request. Delia handed her the required information paper immediately, sparking Espen's amazement, screaming in wonder at the great speed the matter was accomplished with. Espen thanked Delia, telling herself the Adventurers Guild Information Network was the real winning deal given this amazing speed. Espen's consolation to Luciano wasn't just empty words to lift his spirits, for she knew with certainty that in the future he would grow to become swordmaster level and have no rival in fencing, but that wouldn't happen unless he received proper education. Therefore, the person she was looking for this time was the man nicknamed the Drunken Sword. He was the person who would become Luciano's teacher in the original novel's events. While the carriage cut its way through the forest, Espen wondered secretly why she delayed searching for him until now, despite knowing of his existence. Espen looked out the window, thinking she was afraid her interference in character, relationships, and rushing their meeting might rob them of the chance to get close and grow naturally, and remembered how Harrison's early appearance proved her fears weren't without cause, although she didn't know his identity then. Espen sat in the carriage, thinking about the original novel details which mentioned Luciano and his teacher Kyle met by pure coincidence. And although she didn't know what they were doing then, she knew Luciano well. Her train of thought was interrupted by her escort Billy's voice announcing their approach, while thinking Luciano wouldn't open up to a stranger easily. Espen smiled confidently, realizing the second reason for her hesitation was Luciano's cautious personality. But now she understood what to do, for even after becoming friends, Luciano was still cautious of people, so she needed a valid and strong reason to introduce someone to him. Espen got out of the carriage thinking recent events of defeat and humiliation would make Luciano desire strongly to get a skilled teacher now. Considering this the perfect timing to find the Drunken Sword, the two stood before a bar named the Heavy Drunkard, and anxiety appeared clearly on Billy's face, asking if she really planned to enter there. Espen answered with total confidence the person she came to meet was inside according to Delia's information. Billy muttered with fear, imagining the punishment he would receive if the Count knew he brought his daughter to such a place. But Espen reassured him with uncertain phrases, pushing him to enter. Sweat poured from Billy's face, and he asked for one promise, which was if he decided the situation inside was inappropriate, they must leave immediately. Espen agreed with an innocent smile, but conditioned in return that if one of the drunks attacked her, he must protect her. Billy was shocked by her strange condition, while she ran toward the entrance, leaving him confused. Billy tried to catch up with her, screaming, inquiring with panic about that attack story and what exactly she was planning. Espen opened the bar door forcefully and entered, waving her hand, greeting loudly, announcing she came to meet the Drunken Sword, while Billy tried to stop her in vain. Silence prevailed in the bar suddenly, and eyes turned toward the little girl, while a man with blue hair and an eye patch drank beer ravenously, then hit his cup forcefully on the table. The man turned to her with a sharp look and annoyed features, describing her as a brat and asking threateningly who dared call him by that name recklessly. The man faced Espen with a threatening tone, describing her as the little one daring to pronounce his name. Espen asked boldly if he was Cal the Drunkard, so he replied with indifference and challenge, asking what would happen if he was indeed. She told him she wanted to talk to him a little. He turned his face away from her coldly, announcing he had nothing to say to a noble lady. Espen was annoyed by his total ignorance of her, so she decided to raise a more interesting topic to attract his attention. She called him suddenly by his real name, Pedro, confirming he was the person concerned, making his features freeze and his single eye show clear shock. His face turned to a mixture of anger and shock, asking with a dark and terrifying tone how a noble girl knew this name forgotten by oblivion. Espen noticed the general atmosphere changed completely as soon as she pronounced his real name, and felt danger. Suddenly, his hand extended toward her with lightning speed, so Espen screamed in panic, stammering, trying to retreat. He almost grabbed her had it not been for Billy's quick intervention, intercepting his hand and protecting Espen with his body, while Kyle stood amazed by the reaction speed. The two men exchanged sharp and tense looks, while Espen trembled behind Billy. Espen realized the attack was so sudden she didn't even think to dodge it, and had Billy not grabbed her at the right moment, Kyle would have grabbed her by the collar. Kyle expressed admiration for Billy's quick reaction, but directed a stern warning to Espen not to underestimate him and look down on him just because he was a drunk, otherwise she would get hurt. Kyle continued speaking angrily, believing they sent a child to lower his defenses, asking if those people had no dignity, sparking Espen's surprise, not understanding whom he spoke of. Meanwhile, bar patrons erupted, standing from their seats with frowning faces, asking if nobles came to harass Cal again. The crowd began muttering angrily, remembering how Kyle beat the last one who came to him, and Espen realized there were hostile noble factions against Kyle, and bar patrons were trying to protect him. Espen tightened her grip on her dress, realizing she needed to clarify this misunderstanding immediately before things got out of control and everyone revolted against her. Espen screamed with a loud and strong voice, asking them to wait a moment, confirming they understood the matter completely wrong. Kyle was surprised by her screaming, while she pointed her finger toward him, boldly scolding him. She explained sharply. She said clearly she wanted to talk only and had no intention to attack, confirming he was the one who initiated threatening her suddenly. Then she turned to the surrounding crowd, scolding them, asking if it was right for a group of adults to surround and threaten a lone child without even listening to her, even if it was to help a friend. The men felt embarrassed and confused by her logical words, and started wondering among themselves if they were the bad guys in this situation, especially since she came without soldiers. Kyle looked at her suspiciously, admitting his old name was known only to those who knew his past, asking if she used it as a type of threat that she had leverage on him. Espen looked at him and Billy, thinking secretly the student resembled his teacher exactly. Both were extremely cautious and difficult to deal with. Espen tried to justify her position, telling him to think about it logically. If she harbored bad intentions, she wouldn't have revealed herself to him in this direct way. She admitted honestly she searched for him and collected information about him, but that was only because she wanted to ask a favor of him, and offered to make a deal if he didn't wish to grant the favor. Kyle laughed sarcastically, mocking the idea of a little girl asking him to make a deal. But Espen smiled confidently and energetically, confirming she wasn't a normal child, asking him to listen to her and he wouldn't regret it, suggesting moving to another place to talk freely. Kyle agreed, and they moved to a quieter and brighter outdoor place. Kyle asked her seriously about the favor she wanted to ask, with his prior reservation that he didn't promise to agree to it. Espen entered the heart of the subject directly with a confident smile, pointing out she heard rumors confirming his fencing skill was very exceptional, paving the way for her main request. Espen asked the man seriously if he had ever thought about taking a disciple. Kyle was surprised by her question, thinking she wanted to learn herself, but she corrected him, explaining she wanted him to train a friend of hers. She assured him enthusiastically that her friend possessed immense potential, and that with a good teacher he would become an exceptional swordsman. She offered him a tempting deal. If he accepted her offer, she would help him grant his wish in return. Kyle looked at her with suspicion and mockery, wondering if she even knew what he wanted, to which she answered with total confidence. Then she threw her bombshell in his face, revealing the truth of what he aspired to, asking him directly if what he sought was revenge. Kyle's gaze shifted to extreme caution, and he asked her how deep she had dug into his background. Espen smiled with feigned innocence, pointing out that knowing the name Pedro meant she knew everything, but deep down she knew she was partially bluffing and relying on guesswork halfway through. Espen recalled the novel's information stating he was an imperial knight, and that he was expelled disgracefully due to a certain incident. She remembered that in the original story, he would train Luciano only to exploit him for his own revenge. Espen connected his wariness of nobles with his violent reaction to the mention of his real name, deducing that his target was the person who framed him and caused his expulsion from the Knights. Since responsibility for any incident within the Knights falls on the commander, and the current commander is a man loyal to Empress Isabel, Espen realized smartly that they had a common enemy, and offered to help him take revenge on the Empress's faction. She asked his opinion on the offer while looking at him challengingly. Kyle admitted the boldness of her offer and that she wasn't someone to be underestimated, but he added that there were limits to what she could do to help, even if she knew his goal. Kyle presented his own proposal instead, asking her to bring the boy she wanted him to train, so he could judge for himself if he was worth the trouble before making a decision. Espen noticed his sly smile and realized he planned to claim Luciano had no talent to kick them out as soon as he saw him. She smiled with sarcastic confidence to herself, saying what a pity, for she knew for a fact that Luciano was a genius destined to be the strongest in this world. She accepted the challenge enthusiastically, warning him to prepare to be dazzled. She felt great excitement as she anticipated the fateful meeting between the teacher and his student. The next day, Luciano arrived at the pub feeling reluctant, having come under duress after Espen's persistence. Luciano looked at Kyle with disgust, calling him an old man, but Espen was surprised after Luciano opened his rude mouth. Espen felt extremely tense, hoping inwardly Luciano would watch his words after all the hard work she put into arranging this meeting. But the atmosphere tensed up and the conversation died immediately as soon as they stood face to face. With complete frankness and rudeness, Luciano asked Espen about the identity of this man reeking of alcohol, refusing to believe this drunkard was the person she wanted to introduce him to, while Espen tried to silence him in panic. Kyle commented sarcastically that he didn't expect another rude child to show up, noting that Luciano didn't hesitate to speak rudely to strangers. Espen felt terrified seeing sparks fly between them from the first moment, realizing that continuing this situation would lead to an imminent explosion between the two strong personalities. Espen remembered she couldn't reveal Luciano's identity as a prince now, and tried to salvage the situation before Luciano said something that would expose him. Espen thought to herself that if Kyle knew Luciano was the prince, he might accept him immediately as the perfect tool for revenge, which would make building true trust between them impossible and much harder. She decided she needed to create a moment that allowed them to accept each other naturally, away from titles and interests. Espen called out to Luciano with a loud and affectionate voice using the nickname Lucy, asking him to listen to her, and reminding him that his birthday was close and she had prepared something special for him. Luciano froze in amazement, and Espen wondered to herself if shortening his name annoyed him, but she noticed his tense looks, his eye twitching, and the movement of his mouth. She understood Luciano was trying to hide something, and despite his face turning red from shyness and his attempt not to show it, he seemed accepting of the name Lucy. Espen thought Luciano seemed to like the nickname Lucci because it sounded friendly, and wondered if he would accept her gift in this case. She continued her act enthusiastically, confirming that Lucy was perfect, while signaling him with her eyes to agree to the gift. Luciano agreed with stammering and shyness. Kyle watched the scene with mockery, wondering in amazement if he was just a prop in their play, and commented sarcastically on them enjoying their time. He announced with boredom that he would leave if they were going to play family game in front of him, but Espen stopped him quickly, asking him not to get agitated and to at least exchange greetings. Espen introduced Kyle to Luciano formally, announcing with a broad smile that he was the person who would become his teacher. Luciano looked at her with shock and surprise, asking what she meant by teacher. Espen assured him he would be the fencing teacher who would teach him the correct techniques for using a sword. Luciano thanked her for her thought, but refused the offer with cold politeness and sharp looks. He explained sharply while pointing at Kyle that he didn't wish to learn the sword from someone who couldn't even take care of himself and didn't carry a well-maintained sword, but rather reeked of alcohol. Anger ignited in Kyle's eyes, and he called Luciano an arrogant child, asking if he knew how great and strong he was previously. He approached him challengingly, asking him to test him and vowing to break this arrogance possessing him forever. Luciano refused the offer again coldly, saying he saw no need for that. Kyle asked him sarcastically if he was afraid of actual fighting now that things got serious, or if he didn't trust the judgment of his friend who brought him. Luciano wondered what he planned to do with the child, and that if they fought, the humiliation wouldn't be his share. Kyle announced with excessive confidence he bet his life on winning, confirming Luciano wouldn't be able to even scratch him. Kyle raised his finger, specifying the condition, which was just one hit. One round with bare hands, and Luciano could use any tricks he wanted, and if he managed to knock him down or touch him, the win would be his. Luciano was stunned by this excessive confidence and asked about its source, surprised by this arrogance. Kyle answered him coldly that skill was the source, and that he was giving him a huge advantage so he shouldn't retreat like a coward. Luciano accepted the challenge finally with a sharp look, warning him against regretting this choice. Espen watched the situation with tension, wondering to herself if Kyle intentionally provoked Luciano to drag him into this fight, and decided to cheer for Kyle silently to take charge and prove his worth. Luciano rushed toward his opponent with speed and a surprise attack, shouting enthusiastically. But Kyle dodged the attack with a very simple and smooth movement, as if he expected the blow's path completely. Mocking lightly, Espen was stunned by the scene, for Kyle managed to disrupt Luciano's balance in a single moment and with minimal effort possible. Luciano tried to regain his balance and launch another attack with a series of quick punches. However, Kyle was dodging with a confident smile, evading every blow with the skill that provoked the little prince's rage. Suddenly, Kyle grabbed Luciano's hand and stopped him, directing advice to him in the tone of a strict teacher, praising his attempt, but warning him that if he attacked recklessly while his stance was already broken, he would be countered easily. Luciano was shocked, and his eyes widened, disbelieving what happened, as he was confident he aimed his blow completely out of his opponent's field of vision. Kyle answered him with a sly smile, explaining that this was the difference experience makes, and asked him provocatively if he had given up already. Luciano didn't give up, but continued challenging Kyle and attacking him again and again. But the result was the same, as Kyle countered all Luciano's attacks and blocked them with complete ease as if playing with a child. Luciano tried to direct a powerful kick, but Kyle blocked it with his arm without budging, while signs of fatigue and amazement appeared on Luciano's face. Kyle looked at him with a look carrying a mixture of pity and challenge, asking him if that was the strongest blow he had. With a quick movement, Kyle pushed Luciano away with his hand, commenting with boredom that the fight became very boring. Luciano staggered and almost fell, so Espen rushed toward him, anxiously asking if he was okay. Luciano was panting heavily and sweat was pouring from him, and he looked at Kyle in shock, wondering in amazement about the identity of this person. Kyle stood proudly and asked Luciano with a triumphant tone if he admitted defeat based on his way of speaking now. Luciano wiped the sweat from his face and admitted with bitterness and courage that Kyle was leagues ahead of everyone he faced before. Espen's face lit up hearing that, for Luciano's attitude became more polite and acknowledging of his opponent's strength, and she saw this was her golden opportunity to link them as teacher and student. Espen seized the opportunity to introduce Kyle properly this time, turning to Luciano, enthusiastically explaining she would reintroduce him correctly, and identified the other party as Kyle Pedro, and added proudly while pointing to him that despite being a drunkard in a bar now, he possessed skill sufficient to serve in the Imperial Knights. As soon as he heard the name, Luciano froze in place and whispered the name Kyle Pedro, as if recalling a distant memory. Luciano remembered immediately this was the name of the former knight commander. Luciano retrieved in his memory Kyle in the knight's uniform, the man who, despite being born a commoner, snatched the position of the youngest knight commander thanks to his pure skill only. He remembered how he was hailed as a genius swordsman, and how he enjoyed great trust not just from the knight order, but from the people too. Luciano looked at the current Kyle in amazement, recalling rumors that said the knight commander changed suddenly 5 years ago, thinking he was too young then to realize his achievements. But he never imagined a giant like him would end up in a back alley. Meanwhile, Espen herself was in a state of internal shock, sweating as she thought she had no idea that old drunkard was someone this amazing, for her information was superficial. Kyle noticed Luciano's amazed looks, so he answered him arrogantly, saying he didn't expect a rude child like him to know who he was. This sparked Luciano's anger immediately, as he never accepted being described as a rude child. Espen intervened quickly with a very tense smile to calm the situation, before Kyle made another mistake and insulted the prince, trying to salvage the situation. Espen introduced Luciano to Kyle clearly and calmly, announcing that His Highness's name was Luciano Frederick. As soon as he heard the name, Kyle's features froze and he repeated the last name, Frederick, with a voice carrying a tone of disbelief. His eyes widened in shock and sweat began pouring from his forehead, as he realized immediately that the title Frederick was held only by royal family members. Without a moment of hesitation, Kyle knelt on his knees, bowing with extreme respect, and lowered his head, apologizing with a trembling voice for his previous rudeness, justifying his lack of knowledge that he left the palace when the prince was still very young. Kyle continued his apology sincerely, asking for forgiveness for his unintentional disrespect toward His Highness. But Luciano extended his hand quietly toward Kyle, asking him to rise, noting this was considered the first time they saw each other properly, then added with a faint smile, reminding him he became his teacher now. Thus, the tense meeting between Luciano and Kyle ended with a warm conclusion, as the two shook hands and each acknowledged the other. opening their hearts to the beginning of a new relationship. Luciano engaged immediately in his serious training and began training with wooden swords enthusiastically under his new teacher's supervision. Meanwhile, Espen didn't waste her time. As she followed up on her additional investments with May and Belle, she bought the shop that would become the headquarters of Maybelle Sweets Shop, preparing for its grand opening. Espen chose the location and facilities with extreme care and cooperation with May, and the reason they did so alone was to prepare a special surprise for Belle. Espen looked at her piggy bank with tears streaming from her eyes, lamenting the huge amount that vanished from her savings because of this investment, but consoled herself that she would definitely get 10 times this amount in the future. May thanked Espen with deep gratitude, while promising her they would do their best to make the project succeed. Espen asked curiously about the sweets they were preparing for Apple Day, so May told her enthusiastically they brought some pies for her to taste. May revealed a delicious blueberry pie, and Espen bit into a piece, hearing the delicious crunch sound. Espen praised the wonderful taste, and May assured her confidently they sold the entire quantity daily, meaning business was going excellently. And on Apple Day, Espen was walking in the street eating her pie, while Harrison appeared in the background carrying a bunch of gifts. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out to Espen, so she turned to see who was calling her. Harrison stood there carrying a large pile of gifts and asked her gently if she was okay. Noting he hadn't seen her for a month, Espen recognized him immediately and cheered his name Harrison with a smile, but she noticed something strange. Harrison looked extremely exhausted and pale-faced and was carrying a lot of gifts in his hands. She asked Harrison in a faint voice if he visited His Highness Prince Luciano today too, so Harrison answered in the affirmative. Her features changed to worry, and she asked him if the prince rejected him again. So Harrison remembered the moment of rejection and answered sadly in the affirmative. Espen began to worry greatly about him, while thinking about the reason for her anxiety, and if it was due to seeing him being kicked out of the reception room that day. Espen began sinking into her dark thoughts, believing Harrison apologized early because of her, and because of the mistake she made in the past. Espen cut her train of thought, and asked him gently to talk for a moment if his time allowed. They sat together at an outdoor table, and Harrison started his speech by apologizing for what happened last time. Espen understood he meant the day she met him when he came to apologize to Luciano. Espen tried to relieve him, saying there was no need to apologize, but he justified his apology, thinking perhaps he made her feel uncomfortable. Espen denied that quickly, confirming she was worried about him more. Then Harrison looked at her seriously, realizing she had discovered his true identity as Lord Olindo. Harrison asked Espen with a polite and hesitant tone, noting she seemed very close to His Highness the Crown Prince, and inquired of her if his question wasn't an intrusion about the duration it took her to gain His Highness's trust. Espen thought to herself watching him, noticing Harrison seemed very sincere in his desire to apologize to Luciano. Although this was only his second visit, she answered him with honesty mixed with some sorrow, saying it took her a little over a year, and felt pity for him because she knew what Luciano went through needed more than just time to heal. Harrison's eyes widened in amazement and repeated in shock, "A whole year?" Espen confirmed her words, explaining she kept following and chasing him everywhere since their first meeting, when she was 8 years old. She admitted to him that in the beginning she heard many cruel and hurtful words from him, and recalled those times when her attempts to help led only to angering His Highness and making him more annoyed. Harrison asked her in surprise if she really didn't give up for a whole year. So Espen answered with confidence that if she gave up, His Highness would have remained alone again, pointing out that people approaching him then retreating led only to increasing the thickness of the walls he built around himself. She explained to him her biggest motive was her desire for him to know there was at least one person standing on his side, and added with a warm smile she believed at some stage, His Highness began realizing her true intentions and understanding her. Harrison muttered the word sincerity, as if contemplating its meaning deeply. Then his tone changed to sadness, explaining his situation was a little different because he actually committed a sin against His Highness. He looked at her with sad eyes and asked if she was ready to listen to a topic that might be heavy and painful. He began narrating his story, explaining that when he was younger than he is now, he suffered from an extremely dangerous illness. Doctors, priests, and even mages examined him, but their answer was always one: there is no cure. He continued saying that at the time he lost all hope, his father received an offer from someone. The offer was demonic, which was that if his father poisoned Crown Prince Luciano, they would give him a potion dose that could save his son's life. Although his father knew this was a grave mistake and shouldn't be done, he weakened before his desire to save his son. Espen realized the bitter truth. Count Olindo chose to save his son instead of his nephew. Harrison clenched his fist, tears gathering in his eyes, admitting that His Highness's inability to trust people and his building of those walls around his heart was ultimately his fault entirely. Espen looked at him with empathy, while Harrison continued saying he knew he couldn't atone for his father's sin, but he wanted only to apologize to His Highness with all his being. Tears streamed from his eyes, asking her with weakness and hope if she believed his sincerity might reach Luciano one day. Espen answered him immediately and firmly that it would definitely reach. She offered Harrison a handkerchief to wipe his tears, while Espen thought to herself this was a role she could play because she knew the original novel's events. For she knew with certainty Harrison would eventually become the closest knight to Luciano and the person protecting him loyally. Espen decided to offer advice to him, saying he must remember that an apology must consider the feelings of the person receiving it. She advised him seriously not to offer him any food, due to the poison complex, and to clarify completely, he didn't intend to threaten him and suggested he also give His Highness time to think because his appearance was sudden. Harrison thanked her with deep gratitude, appreciating the advice she gave for his sake. Suddenly, Espen felt a dark aura behind her and a voice calling her, "My little miss?" So she turned in panic to find Billy standing beside her. Billy seemed angry and worried, scolding her that he was searching for her everywhere. To be surprised, she was having tea with a complete stranger. Billy looked at Harrison suspiciously, while Espen reminded him he was the person they glimpsed briefly on Apology Day. Although realizing the lack of taste in his question, Billy directed a direct inquiry to Harrison about his age, sparking the young man's confusion. Billy didn't wait long before exploding in anger, stressing loudly that his little miss was only 11, and scolding him that any sane adult should know his limits and not approach children, while Espen tried to stop him in panic calling his name. Harrison's face reddened with shyness and confusion, and hastened to clarify the major misunderstanding, revealing he would turn 16 only this year, which hit Billy and Espen with shock and total amazement. Billy stared at him disbelieving, asking suspiciously if he was really 16, so Harrison confirmed that seriously. Billy sighed, apologizing for his misunderstanding, while Harrison accepted the apology graciously, explaining his huge physical build often caused this type of confusion for people. Despite his apology, Billy stuck to his strict stance, announcing his categorical refusal of secret meetings at such a young age, even if the Count didn't know about it, making Espen wonder with annoyance inwardly why he acted this way today specifically. Billy continued his embarrassing interrogation, asking Harrison sharply if he approached the miss with inappropriate intentions, so Harrison denied that strongly and nervously. Billy pointed his finger at the huge pile of gifts, deducing suspiciously they were definitely not intended for his little miss. Espen couldn't take any more, so she screamed in Billy's face, asking him to stop, and confirming loudly their relationship wasn't as he thought at all. And to cut doubt with certainty and end Billy's interrogation, she was forced to tell a cruel and direct lie, announcing in front of everyone that Harrison wasn't her favorite type at all, while apologizing to him deep down because she knew this was the only way to silence Billy. Harrison was shocked by her words and seemed frustrated and sad, while Espen confirmed to Billy coldly her preferences were very clear. Espen dragged Billy away, apologizing to Lord Olindo for her rudeness and telling him she had to leave now, directing a silent warning to Billy that she was watching him. Before moving away completely, Espen turned toward Harrison, wishing the matters he worried about would go well. Harrison put his hand on his chest with gratitude, thanking her sincerely for the day and for her advice he wouldn't forget, wishing her a safe return home. Harrison stood watching her as she moved away, whispering the name Miss Samuel with a look carrying much appreciation.